Chapter 471. The second patriarch lowered his head respectfully, as did the other Lu family patriarchs. Lu Feng did the same. However, no one noticed the strange look in Lu Feng's eyes. Lu Feng finally knew the identity of the great patriarch of the Lu family. He was actually the Lu family's Saint Dao alchemist, one of the three great Saint Dao alchemists of the present age, Saint Pill Master Lu. This caused Lu Feng to be both surprised and enlightened. Saint Pill Master Lu is one of the three great Saint Dao alchemists of the present age. Although I have heard of Saint Pill Master Lu's existence, I didn't know that he was actually the great patriarch Lu Feng and the great patriarch had met before. Lu Feng hadn't sensed the rich aura of alchemy from him. However, Lu Feng also understood now. Saint Pill Master Lu must have concealed his aura in such a situation. One had to know that a void emperor who could escape from the hands of a supreme divine king was definitely comparable to those heaven-defying and invincible almighties. Once he concealed himself, it was only natural that someone like him wouldn't be able to see through it. You can now head to the Desolate Era battlefield. The desolate aura there has been completely absorbed by the Great Desolation Totem. The second patriarch raised his head with a strange look in his eyes. Taradas spoke at this time. As the only disciple of Saint Pill Master Rong, he naturally wasn't too reserved in front of his master. Master, do you know about the Great Desolation Totem too? The 14 of them landed directly on this tranquil land. Among them, apart from Lu Feng, the other 13 were all peerless almighties. Any one of them could really shake the universe. Therefore, Lu Feng wasn't worried at all when he came out with the 13 Lu family patriarch. He knew that unless a supreme god king appeared, no one would be able to harm him. One of the Lu family patriarchs found a cultivator in the perfect stage who was quietly recuperating. With a single step, he had already arrived beside him. The patriarch of the Lu family didn't deliberately hide anything. Therefore, when he arrived, the perfect stage warrior instantly felt it. The perfect stage martialist's expression changed slightly when he saw the patriarch of the Lu family standing in front of him. A faint chuckle could be heard from the void. The Great Wilderness Totem is a supreme weapon condensed by the Desolate Era. It's a pity that the Desolate Era has completely become a part of history. Due to the fact that no epic overlord was born, there were hardly any traces of their era being passed down. That's why I've only found out a little about it through certain channels. Hearing this, many beings nodded lightly. The existence of Alchemy Master Rong was extremely ancient. It could even be traced back to the era before the human monarch. It was only natural for him to know so much. Since your majesty has said so, then let's set off now. Second Patriarch was not a hesitant person. He knew that the power of death would be of great help to Lu Feng. Every moment of delay would cause a great loss to a freak like Lu Feng. Therefore, Second Patriarch made a prompt decision and chose to set off immediately. However, just as they were about to set off, Alchemy Master Rong's voice was heard again. This time, many of the peak overlords already know about the existence of that place. Therefore, the number of experts gathered there will reach an astonishing number. All of you must be careful. Although the Desolate Era was a supreme era comparable to the peak eras of the Human Dao Era and the Buddhist Dao Era, due to the condensing of the Great Wilderness Totem, there aren't many divine items left from that era. Therefore, you don't have to be too attached to those items. Safety is the most important thing. When the last words were heard, they were filled with a faint feeling. Many beings knew that Alchemy Master Rong had already withdrawn his consciousness from this place. These people gently nodded their heads in response to the instructions in his words, after which all of them gathered their gazes towards Lu Feng's side. They all knew that Alchemy Master Rong had said this because Lu Feng was here. It could be said that he had said this for Lu Feng's sake. Otherwise, even if they were truly peerless or invincible existences, in the eyes of a supreme being like Alchemy Master Rong, they would be nothing more than ants at the peak of the world. Alright, now get ready. We can set off. Without hesitation, Second Patriarch gave the order. Many of the Lu family's ancestors nodded lightly. They also did not say much and got up to follow Second Patriarch outside. Lu Feng did not leave immediately. He walked in front of the 8 alchemy grandmasters and bowed respectfully 3 times. Thank you, grandmasters, for taking care of Lu Feng all this time. Lu Feng will never forget this. The 8 alchemy grandmasters could be said to have taken care of Lu Fenglai ever since he came here. Whether it was in terms of resources or when facing any enemy, they had always been by his side to protect him. Therefore, Lu Feng was very grateful to the 8 alchemy grandmasters, especially the 2 great ancestors of the human race. After leaving this time, Lu Feng also knew that he would not be able to return in a short period of time. He did not have the capital to thank these people yet, but Lu Feng would always remember their kindness. The 8 alchemy grandmasters accepted Lu Feng's respectful bow. They knew that Lu Feng was grateful. If they did not accept it, Lu Feng would definitely not feel good. After seeing Lu Feng straighten his body, the few of them did not say anything else. They looked at Lu Feng's back as he turned around and left. Their faces were filled with a strange smile. Lu Feng is not only domineering as an emperor, but he also has unparalleled talent. His temperament is also commendable. Looking at the disappearing figure, Tirada sighed. The outland battlefield was endlessly vast. It was much larger than the Milky Way, which was recognized as the #1 central galaxy in the universe. Among them, there were the most famous 36 domains. However, these 36 domains were not the entire outland battlefield. In addition to these places, there were many ancient battlefields in the outland battlefield. They were the places that truly occupied most of the space in the outland battlefield. The place where the 14 of them were heading was the Desolate Era battlefield. The Desolate Era battlefield was located at the edge of the Open Sky territory, one of the 3 territories controlled by the War God race. The War God race was one of the 3 pinnacle races in the Milky Way. They had always been on good terms with the human race. The 2 pinnacle races had even joined forces to form the pinnacle force of the universe, the gods. Therefore, there was no trouble at all if they wanted to use the War God race. Along the way, they constantly traveled through space. However, in this chaotic outland battlefield, it took them 7 days to finally arrive at the Open Sky territory. Lu Feng, this is the Open Sky territory. The Desolate Era's battlefield was just ahead of them. Therefore, if you need to prepare anything or want to rest, it's best to hurry. Lu Feng's eyes lit up as he watched the Open Sky city, which was bustling with people. There were countless experts mixed in with the people coming and going. Although it was not a big deal for powerhouses to appear in the central city of the 36 great territories of the outland battlefield, the number of powerhouses that appeared was a little too high. Among them, the ratio of powerhouses to ordinary existences had far exceeded the normal number. At this moment, Lu Feng also understood that Alchemy Saint Rong's words about many powerhouses heading to the Desolate Era battlefield were not false at all. Second Patriarch, so many people have already gathered. If we wait any longer, I'm afraid there will be even more. Therefore, we don't have to wait any longer. Let's set off immediately. Lu Feng's state was basically at its peak at all times. Furthermore, what he wanted to do was to comprehend, not fight. Therefore, he did not need to prepare anything or recover to his peak state. Hearing this, the Second Patriarch nodded gently. He looked at the 12 peerless patriarchs of the Lu family beside him and nodded gently. Then, he led Lu Feng 1,000,000 miles away with a single step. Open Sky City was already located in the outermost area of the Open Sky territory. After leaving this peak city, they were faced with a battlefield that was full of mottled space and time that was starting to become chaotic. In the foreign region battlefield, it is impossible to train in these battlefields. Therefore, there are very few people in these places. It is also because of this reason that there are no clans occupying these places and establishing territories. Lu Feng nodded gently. Even if such a place was built at a huge cost, it would not be able to obtain any resources. Moreover, the space and time in these places were chaotic and the spirit energy was thin. It was worse than the harsh places in the universe. Naturally, no one cared about such places. As for the famous battlefields, they are shared by many races. Although the space and time in those places is also chaotic, there are countless treasures and resources left behind by the fallen powerhouses of various races. Therefore, those places are actually considered treasure lands. Unfortunately, so far, no one has dared to occupy those places. After all, no matter how strong a race is, it cannot contend against the combined might of so many peak races. As they spoke, they had already traveled hundreds of millions of miles. It was almost impossible to travel through space and time in this place. Even someone as strong as the Divine King, who had complete control over space, could not travel through this endless chaotic space and time. If one was not careful, they would be drawn into an unknown place by the chaotic space and time turbulence. Therefore, although they could easily travel through space and time, they did not dare do so. They could only rely on their own speed to start traversing infinitely. However, even if they used their own body strength to traverse, they did not dare go too fast. This was because there were dangers everywhere in the outland battlefield. When they stopped, they had already arrived at a special area. It was special because in this area, Lu Feng could no longer feel the terrifying chaos outside. Of course, the biggest difference between this place and the previous places was that the number of experts here was way too many. Previously, in the range of billions of miles, Lu Feng had not seen many existences at all. However, although there was not a sea of people here, there were still many of them. Lu Feng, the desolate era battlefield is not far ahead. This is the only peaceful place before entering the desolate era battlefield. Peaceful place? Lu Feng's eyes were filled with doubts. Seeing this scene, the second ancestor seemed to recall that Lu Feng had not really been to these battlefields. These peaceful places are some of the more special places in these battlefields. Due to some inexplicable reasons, there are some special places in the battlefields that do not have space-time turbulence and those strange dangers. These places are the peaceful places in the battlefield. Those who have been wandering the battlefields all year round can have some places to rest. After hearing the second ancestor's explanation, Lu Feng understood. This was equivalent to an oasis in the desert. It was a place where people could rest temporarily. All right, let's go in and ask about the current situation. Chapter 472. In this foreign battlefield, as long as one saw a stranger, the first thing one would do was to sense their strength. And this time, this perfect stage warrior was no exception. Unfortunately, in his perception, the Lu family's ancestor seemed to have no strength at all. There was no sign of strength, no fluctuation of power. The perfect stage warrior's expression was very ugly. When facing someone stronger than him, he could feel the fluctuation of power. When facing a terrifying existence, he could feel the existence of a vast sea of power. But now, when facing the Lu family's ancestor, he couldn't even feel the slightest fluctuation of power. This was simply impossible. After all, anyone who could come here was definitely not an ordinary person. Senior, is there something I can help you with? In an instant, the perfect stage warrior knew what he should say. His expression changed to one of incomparable respect in an instant. He bowed slightly to express a sincere surprise. The Lu family's ancestor had long been used to such an attitude. He nodded slightly and said, "How long has the desolate era battlefield been open? How many people have already entered?" The perfect stage warrior didn't hesitate at all. This was because he knew that every bit of concealment couldn't be concealed in front of such a terrifying existence. If he tried to conceal it, he was afraid that he wouldn't even know how he died. Moreover, He had no reason to conceal it. Therefore, the perfect stage warrior didn't hold back and told everything he knew. After hearing that no less than 10 million warriors and even gods had entered, Lu Feng's expression changed slightly. Tens of millions of warriors and above. This kind of power was definitely enough to shock the world. Senior, as for those more powerful existences, I can't sense them. Therefore, I don't know how many true gods and existences above true gods have entered. The perfect stage warrior was telling the truth. He didn't even have the qualifications to sense those existences. If he deliberately tried to sense them and angered them, he would be turned into ashes in an instant. The Lu family's ancestor nodded slightly. At this moment, his gaze had passed through countless people and entered the desolate era battlefield. It seems that this time, many people have prepared in advance. However, if it weren't for Lu Feng's terrifying battle, I'm afraid there would be more people here. The patriarchs nodded gently. They brought Lu Feng here almost immediately after the battle between Lu Feng and the Demon King's clone. Among those who watched the battle, their strength was unparalleled, so they should be the first group to arrive here. However, as time passed, more and more people would arrive one after another. At that time, the number would definitely be in the hundreds of millions or even billions. I'm afraid these people didn't expect the desolate aura of the battlefield of the desolate era to disappear so quickly. You should know that if it wasn't for His Highness Alchemy Master Rong Saint, we would have arrived. They gently nodded their heads. That was indeed the case. Then, let's not waste any more time. In a moment, the ancestors and I will guard Lu Feng so that he can comprehend in peace. The few of you go in and wander around to see if you can find anything valuable. Remember, safety is the most important. The most precious thing in the Lu family is our bloodline descendants. Upon hearing the second forefather's words, the patriarchs nodded respectfully. In an instant, 14 figures blurred in front of the perfect stage cultivator and then gradually disappeared. Looking at the departing figures, the perfect stage cultivator's eyes shone brightly. It was a slightly excited color. When the second ancestor spoke just now, he didn't pay attention to anything and didn't deliberately conceal it. Therefore, the perfect stage cultivator heard everything very clearly. He took a deep breath, the shock in his eyes becoming more and more obvious. It's actually the Lu family's ancestor. It's the terrifying existence of the human king's Lu family. It seems that this young existence should be the taboo monarch who has been the talk of the town for countless eras, the taboo monarch. Although he didn't watch the battle, as the battle ended, all the information and situation regarding the battle between the taboo monarch and the demon king appeared in various places in the universe. Almost everyone knew about it. Comprehend? Let the taboo monarch comprehend? Let him comprehend what? You have to know that this place is filled with an endless amount of death energy. Judging from their appearance, it seems like they came directly for this place. That means the taboo monarch wants to comprehend something related to death. There can only be one type of death energy that can make the taboo monarch, the young master of the Lu family, personally comprehend. His eyes widened slightly as a look of disbelief appeared on his face. The perfect stage cultivator swallowed hard and muttered to himself in a trembling voice. Could it be the death energy? It's the death energy of the supreme energy. How terrifying! The taboo monarch with 4 types of death energy is comparable to the demon king with 6 types of death energy. Now that he has comprehended the death energy, how terrifying will he be? In just a few minutes, they had already arrived at another ancient region. This place was filled with a desolate aura. Lu Feng felt a kind of desolation that made his heart palpitate. His body trembled slightly as he collected his thoughts. Lu Feng knew that the desolation chi here might have been absorbed by the great desolation totem. However, these places had been soaked in the desolation chi for countless eras. If they weren't corroded by the desolation chi, it could only mean that these places had already been assimilated by the desolation chi. Sure enough, the second patriarch's voice was transmitted over while Lu Feng was hesitating. Lu Feng, you have to be careful. Everything here has already been contaminated by the desolation chi. Although it hasn't been completely assimilated, it still carries the desolation chi for a short period of time. Therefore, you have to be careful. You have to know that the desolation chi has already existed for countless eras. Once it enters your body, you will be corroded in an instant. Lu Feng nodded solemnly. Even if we discover any amazing divine objects in the future, I'm afraid that they won't be able to be used without some special treatment. Therefore, most of the people who come here have terrifying powers behind them. They can easily expel the desolation chi. Lu Feng hadn't thought of this. Originally, he had thought that the tens of millions of martialists who had arrived at the beginning had to be people with great powers behind them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to obtain information. As for the remaining people, most of them were probably lone cultivators. After all, lone cultivators were the most common in foreign battlefield. However, after hearing the second patriarch's explanation, Lu Feng finally understood. Lu Feng, I know that once you comprehend the power of death, you will definitely explore this battlefield. Although the second patriarch hadn't met Lu Feng much, based on the information he had obtained, he could easily see the characteristics of Lu Feng's personality. Lu Feng was a person who liked to take risks. In fact, he would put himself in an extreme position every time. His goal was to become even more powerful. This point could be seen from the bloody battle with the Demon King. At the time, although Lu Feng's martialist rank had only been at the initial stage, he had been able to suppress the Demon King with the help of his second primordial spirit. However, for the sake of raising his cultivation state as fast as possible, he had actually hidden a frightening trump card. Relying solely on his own strength, he had fought against the Demon King. After a narrow escape from death, he finally revealed his trump card once more. Of course, the benefits were remarkable. Lu Feng's warrior level rose from the initial upheaval transformation stage to the peak upheaval transformation stage. It should be known that even with the assistance of countless divine items and the most suitable cultivation environment, ordinary people would still need a terrifying amount of time to reach this stage. Even the most talented people, even if they were an epic monster, wouldn't need more than half a year to reach this stage. Lu Feng, on the other hand, did it in a single battle. Furthermore, he had almost comprehended the true meaning of death in the process of the battle. This kind of benefit was indeed shocking. However, Lu Feng's sacrifice was also rather terrifying. The second patriarch believed that if it had been someone else who hadn't been as crazy as Lu Feng, the outcome would have been different. Your madness can always bring about great benefits. This is because you are the Taboo King. You have been blessed by the origin of the universe and have supreme luck. However, you have to understand one thing, Lu Feng. This kind of luck can't protect you forever. If you are even the slightest bit careless, you will be consigned to eternal damnation. Therefore, unless it is absolutely necessary, I hope that you will not do such a dangerous thing again. Lu Feng was silent. There were some things that he couldn't say out loud. This kind of danger, this kind of madness, was this what Lu Feng wanted? In the past, he had no talent. He was just a stubborn person. However, ever since his transformation, Lu Feng had become crazy. And the reason for all this was the great demon true body. If he didn't go crazy, if he didn't experience danger and fall, if he didn't experience pain and the abyss, how could he break through so quickly? I will be careful, this was the only thing Lu Feng could say. As for not fighting crazily, unless Lu Feng had given up on improving himself, it was absolutely impossible. The second patriarch looked at Lu Feng and sighed softly. He didn't say anything else. After all, wasn't he the same in the past? Chapter 473. Lu Feng's group flew directly into the depth. In the outside world, only some ordinary existences had fallen. The power produced by their deaths was too little. Although there was a barren aura covering it after countless years, it had almost dissipated. If one wanted to get close to the true meaning of death and comprehend the power of death, one had to go into the depth. At the very least, it was a place where some almighty beings had perished. A group of 14 people. Compared to the majestic armies of the other races, the difference was not small at all. However, their strength was fully deserving of the title of being the most terrifying. Along the way, Lu Feng saw countless teams of different races. Among them, there were not only pinnacle overlord races, but also many first-rate, second-rate, and even third-rate races. These third-rate races are all vassal races of the first-rate or pinnacle overlord races. In such a dangerous search process, the pinnacle overlord races will not only send their own people, but also some of their vassal races' experts. This way, even if they perish, it won't just be their own race that perishes. Back when the human race was a vassal race, it was also like this. Lu Feng fell silent. Back when the human race had just stepped into the galaxy era, wasn't it the same? It was even more tragic than now. Back then, the human race had no experts. They could only become a race that was enslaved. However, in the end, the human race produced the third overlord of this era, the first divine king with the title of Peerless Divine King. His appearance completely changed the fate of the human race. Through the efforts of countless human race ancestors, the human race finally became one of the most terrifying pinnacle overlord races in the world. I wonder who has come from the human race this time. Lu Feng thought of the Federal University that his teacher belonged to. One must know that the Federal University was one of the most terrifying organizations in the world. It, the human King Lu family, and the Federation government were publicly recognized as the three major forces of the human race. Even if the other divine king clans joined forces, they would not be able to compare to the three major forces. Very quickly, they had already walked into a deeper area. At this moment, the second ancestor suddenly stopped in his tracks with a faint smile on his face. Upon seeing this scene, Lu Feng knew that he had arrived at his destination. An almighty must have fallen here. Although countless eras have passed, due to the cover of this desolate aura, the power of death produced when he fell has yet to completely dissipate. Lu Feng, you can just stay here and cultivate. Lu Feng nodded gently. If he had come alone, he wouldn't have dared to directly comprehend the true meaning of death produced by the death of a mighty being. After all, even if a mighty existence died, the power produced could still easily annihilate countless gods and true gods. The few of you, head into the depth. Let's see what we can get this time. Remember, we are the bloodline of the human King Lu family. We fear nothing. No matter what race they are, if they dare to provoke my human king bloodline, then kill them without mercy. Although the corners of his mouth were curved into a smile, in Lu Feng's eyes, this smile was filled with a strong bloodthirsty aura. The path of a martialist's cultivation was to defy the heavens and defy the world. They had to break through the heavens and ascend to the 9 heavens. During this period, they would encounter countless difficulties and obstacles. Countless thistles and thorns would spread all over the place. These were all enormous tribulations and experiences. If one wanted to succeed, they had to obliterate all obstacles. If one wanted to reach the heavens and the earth, there would be no more obstacles. If one wanted to have a smooth and unobstructed path, they had to be sufficiently cold and powerful. Anyone who obstructed them would be killed. Lu Feng still vaguely remembered the bloody word, kill, that Tu Tianxian had said to him back then. Therefore, Lu Feng could be considered to have understood this principle. Therefore, when he saw the second ancestor's kind face filled with icy killing intent, Lu Feng didn't feel uncomfortable at all. As you command, ancestor. Although these Lu family ancestors were all at the ancestor level, the way they addressed each other was equivalent to Lu Feng, Lu Tao, and Lu Xiaoran. They were still a little inferior to the Lu family's second ancestor, the heavenly life-death god. After all, the heavenly life-death god was already close to 1,500 years old. Back then, he had been a peerless figure who could compete with the young divine king. Naturally, he was very old. He nodded slightly, and after a brief signal, 5 of the patriarchs disappeared. Of these 5 ancestors, one was an exceptional almighty, while the other 4 were peak almighties. It could be said that as long as they didn't encounter an overly terrifying almighty or a quasi-life and death god, they wouldn't be in any danger. Furthermore, most exceptional almighties wouldn't dare to deal with them. After all, they represented the human king Lu family. Alright, Lu Feng, you should comprehend it as soon as possible. If you comprehend it early, you can enter the depths of the desolate era battlefield as long as your life is not in danger. Lu Feng nodded slightly and sat quietly on the ground. In an instant, when Lu Feng closed his eyes, a strong sense of death assaulted him. This was an aura of decay that originated from the soul. It was a terrifying power of death that seemed to be able to kill even time and space. Lu Feng's heart pounded violently. It was difficult to describe the horror in the depths of his heart at this moment. Although this kind of true essence of death was far less pure than the billions of life and death experiences he had experienced in the massacre abyss, it was still far from pure. However, the majesty and decay of this kind of death was something that couldn't be compared to in any other place. In the massacre abyss, it was a pure power of life and death. There was nothing else mixed in. But here, he felt an aura of death that was full of negativity. This kind of aura could easily confuse one's mind and cause one to lose their rationality. It could even cause one to fall directly into the abyss of death and be completely assimilated, becoming a walking corpse. In just an instant, Lu Feng felt his soul rapidly decay and fall towards the edge of death. Such a scene was obviously shocking. Beside Lu Feng, the expression of the Lu family's second patriarch changed slightly. At this moment, he directly raised his arm. His current strength was comparable to any heaven-defying almighty. The owner of this aura of death had only been an almighty when he was alive. His strength when alive was far from being a match for the second patriarch, and it was even more so after death. Therefore, if the second patriarch wanted to expel him, it would be extremely easy. However, just as he was about to make a move, his arm suddenly stopped. This was because the second patriarch had discovered that after the initial passive invasion, Lu Feng had rapidly stabilized. After the activation of this true essence of death, Lu Feng's body seemed to be filled with the power of death. The purity of this power of death made even the second patriarch, the king of life and death, tremble. This is the power of life and death in the body that Lu Feng was talking about? So terrifying, so rich, so pure. There are no negative effects at all. This kind of death is pure, the ultimate existence of death. I have been comprehending for so long, but I have not reached such a level. How can his body contain such rich and pure power of death? The second patriarch was slightly confused at this moment. However, after a moment, he gently exhaled. This was because he knew that Lu Feng was the king of taboo. Across countless time and space, there were only a few kings of taboo. Such a top monster should have belonged to the primordial immortal devil era. Therefore, it was normal for him to have some special characteristics that were different from ordinary people. No wonder Lu Feng dares to say that he is on the verge of enlightenment. Indeed, with such rich and pure power of death in his body, it would not be difficult for him to comprehend it given time. Furthermore, if there is a good opportunity, it will not just be the power of death, but also the power of life. When that happens, Lu Feng will be in existence with 6 supreme powers. Moreover, these 6 supreme powers are all at the pinnacle of existence. The corners of his mouth curled up into a hearty smile. In the second patriarch's opinion, the stronger Lu Feng was, the more the Lu family would prosper. In his eyes, Lu Feng's future represented the Lu family's future and the entire human race's future. In the end, the second patriarch did not say anything after taking a deep look at Luo Yunyang. He quietly sat down in a lotus position around Lu Feng and started to cultivate and comprehend. The other patriarchs of the Lu family also chose the same method. The 7 of them surrounded Lu Feng in the most central position. Usually, there weren't many experts in the battlefield of the foreign domain. After all, there were dangers everywhere in this battlefield. The relics of many ancient powerhouses were not easy to obtain. In many places, due to the accumulation of countless years, many ancient creatures had been reborn in other ways. Generally, ancient existences that could live in other ways were the truly terrifying apex powerhouses of that era. After such existences transformed, they continued to exist in a state of death. It could be said that they were extremely terrifying and horrifying. In addition to the vastness of this battlefields, the chances of encountering life forms in this battlefields were extremely small. Of course, there were exceptions. Just like the battlefield of the desolate era, when it had just opened. Usually, at this time, many powerful existences of various races would enter this battlefields to search for the amazing treasures left behind by the previous era. On the way here, Lu Feng and the others had encountered several waves of powerhouses who had entered this battlefield. However, those who had been able to enter this battlefields first were naturally not weak. They could easily sense the terrifying power contained in the bodies of the Lu family's patriarchs. Therefore, they were wise not to provoke them. Without the acceleration of the time boundary, the time Lu Feng spent cultivating was the normal time of his life. Although he was only a step away from comprehending, this step still took up a lot of Lu Feng's time. A month passed quickly. Lu Feng's comprehension had improved and he was already at the peak of his limit. However, he had been trapped in this peak state for more than 10 days. The second patriarch and the 7 patriarchs of the Lu clan were all truly terrifying almighties and peerless almighties. A month was nothing to them. Therefore, for the past month, they had not moved at all. Chapter 474. During this month, the news of the opening of the battlefield of the desolate era had finally spread to many races and rogue cultivators. This naturally led to countless existences rushing madly towards the battlefield of the desolate era. At this time, the number of experts in the battlefield of the desolate era was more than 100 times more than when Lu Feng and the others had just arrived. Just during the time Lu Feng was comprehending, no less than 100 people passed by. As more and more living beings entered, the battlefield of the desolate era was now full of all kinds of living beings and races. This place was no longer just filled with knowledgeable existences. Later on, there were a lot of lone wolves who were greedy. Although these lone wolves had seen a lot of things, they were also people who were filled with madness. If something was really tempting, then even if they were facing experts who were far stronger than them, they would still dare to make a move. Lu Feng could feel that among the hundreds of people passing by, some of the last ones were obviously starting to harbor ill intentions towards them. Fortunately, these people were also knowledgeable. They knew that those who could cultivate here peacefully must have absolute confidence in themselves. Generally, such existences were not people they could provoke. Finally, the second month arrived. Lu Feng was still in the midst of endless comprehension. After a whole month of cultivation, he had already made the purifying bottle loosen. Lu Feng understood that he would definitely be able to comprehend the power of death, and it would not take too long. You said that this is the place. Just as Lu Feng was quietly comprehending, a voice came from the void. The owner of this voice did not deliberately conceal it and was easily heard by many existences. Lu Feng furrowed his brows slightly. Now, he was close to the edge of comprehension. Just a little bit more and he would be done. The appearance of this voice directly disturbed him. Finally, the noise became louder and louder. In an instant, The voice that was still very far away was close to his ears. At this moment, Lu Feng finally opened his eyes. Looking at these existences in front of him, Lu Feng frowned tightly. Beside him, a patriarch of the Lu family also opened his eyes. Looking quietly at these existences, his voice slowly came out. Scram. It was a simple word without the slightest explanation or even a question. Domineering, incomparably domineering. Hearing the simple word, the 100 or so existences that had descended were stunned. They looked at the patriarch of the Lu clan with a strange look on their faces. However, these people were not idiot. They were not completely enraged by the words of the Lu family's patriarch and rashly attacked without knowing the specific situation. These people looked at Lu Feng and the others. Finally, an existence who seemed to be the leader walked out. With a frown, he arrived in front of Lu Feng and the others. Seeing this, Lu Feng's eyes glowed faintly. He could sense that these were traces of space. When this person had arrived in front of them, he had used the power of space. In other words, the person who had just arrived was definitely a god-level being. Looking at the people behind him, Lu Feng glanced at them and immediately understood. He had guessed the strength of this person. Among the hundreds of existences behind him, more than 30% were martialists in the upheaval stage, more than 50% were in the perfect stage, and the remaining 20% were demigods. Since the group was like this person should be an ordinary divine being. The divine being frowned and glanced at Lu Feng and the others. A moment later, a strange light appeared in his eyes. That slightly impatient expression from before also disappeared without a trace at this moment. He looked at Lu Feng and the others and said slowly, "I did not know that the seniors were here. Sorry to disturb you. We will take our leave now." After saying this, he left without looking back. Clearly, the many lone wolves behind him had also understood something. Their expressions changed drastically. After bowing respectfully, they quickly left in the direction they had come from. Seeing this, Lu Feng's eyes gradually calmed down. He knew that there was only one law in the outland battlefield, and that was the law of the jungle. If you were not strong enough, you would be bullied. Even if you were killed at will by the strong, no one would help you seek justice. Alright, Lu Feng, you can cultivate in peace. Try to comprehend as soon as possible. There seems to be some changes in the outland battlefield. Hearing this, Lu Feng gently nodded his head and quickly immersed himself in cultivation again. Seeing Lu Feng cultivate quietly, the second ancestor opened his eyes. He waved his arm gently and set up a transparent light screen around Lu Feng. After everything was done, the second ancestor slowly stood up. Beside him, the other 6 Lu clan patriarchs who had their eyes closed woke up one after another. The 8 of them stood up quietly and looked into the distance in the same direction. After a long time, the second ancestor's voice slowly sounded. It seems that the opening of the outland battlefield this time will not be so peaceful. A Lu clan ancestor nodded gently when he heard the second patriarch's words. Just now, the primogenitor sent news. This opening does not seem to be natural. It seems to involve some entanglement of fate. The great wilderness totem did not awaken naturally either. It seems to have been awakened by something. The patriarchs' faces were filled with slight worry. The great wilderness totem was a supreme artifact comparable to the most powerful overlord of time. Once its power was unleashed, even the divine king would have to retreat. Yet, such a terrifying thing had been awakened by someone. What was the reason for all this? The patriarchs fell silent for a moment. However, after a while, the second ancestor's eyes flickered. He took out a communication crystal from the void and immersed his consciousness into it. A moment later, a trace of shock appeared in the second ancestor's eyes. Seeing this, the patriarchs revealed a strange expression. Something that could shock the second ancestor, who was comparable to an almighty, had to be something truly shocking. Second ancestor, did something happen one of the patriarchs asked. Hearing this, the second ancestor fell silent for a moment. After a while, he nodded gently. He said slowly, "According to the news from the many powerhouses of the human race who entered this place, this opening seems to have been triggered by someone who awakened the core of the great wilderness totem. The reason it absorbed this endless desolation aura is so that it can fully recover its peak power. Rumor has it that the great wilderness totem is about to recognize a master. The second ancestor's words caused many of the Lu family patriarchs' expressions to change slightly. Then they were thoroughly shocked. In the entire universe, there were very few things that could shock them as almighties. Obviously, the great wilderness totem's recognition of a master was one of them. Can these words be trusted? You must know that not many people knew about the great wilderness totem before this. Indeed, the great wilderness totem was only a legend. Almost no one knew about it before. If they hadn't heard about it from Grandmaster Yingtika, they probably wouldn't have known about the great wilderness totem's existence. If this was the case for them, then it should be the case for others as well. The second patriarch nodded gently and said slowly, "Many experts of the human race's federal government have already sent a few peerless kings into this place. At first, they didn't know about the great wilderness totem's existence. However, after a period of exploration, they finally saw the great wilderness totem in the deepest part of the battlefield of the desolate era. In addition to them, the almighties of the other almighties have also discovered the great wilderness totem's existence. After a few months of investigation, they have confirmed that it is the great wilderness totem. According to the ancient records of their races, the great wilderness totem's current state seems to be a sign that it is about to recognize a master." The few of them fell silent. They knew that this matter had been confirmed by many almighties. In that case, it shouldn't be fake. So what do we do now? Although the Lu family had the human king palace, they weren't that enthusiastic about the great wilderness totem. However, this was an incomparably heaven-defying artifact. It was a terrifying artifact comparable to the almighties of the almighties. In the past, they probably wouldn't have thought of anything. After all, if one wanted to subdue an artifact comparable to an overlord at the peak of time, the price one had to pay was absolutely terrifying. Moreover, even if one had to pay an incalculable price, whether one could succeed or not was another matter. This kind of loss and risk was something that even a human king like the Lu family could not easily bear. However, it was different now, because the great wilderness totem was about to recognize a master. This was enough to tempt them. The second ancestor fell silent. The other almighties looked at him quietly. After a while, the second ancestor's eyes shone with a resolute light. "The 7 of you, gather the other 5 and head to the core area together. If possible, unite the many powerhouses of the human race and seize the great wilderness totem. Of course, the prerequisite is that it won't endanger their lives." When they heard the second patriarch's decision, they all nodded gently. However, in the next moment, their figures had already disappeared. The second ancestor's expression calmed down slightly as he watched them disappear. He looked at Lu Feng beside him and let out a long sigh. The era of the War of the Kings is indeed an era of turmoil. Even such a shocking artifact like the great wilderness totem has appeared. I wonder who will be able to obtain it this time. For 3 whole months, Lu Feng was completely immersed in his comprehension. Finally, at the end of the 3rd month, he succeeded. His eyes slowly opened. At that moment, the void in front of Lu Feng had completely decayed and withered away. This was an incomparably terrifying and shocking scene. It was indescribable and horrifying. Even a god wouldn't be able to accomplish such a remarkable feat easily. However, Lu Feng had done it just by opening his eyes. The second ancestor quietly looked at Lu Feng. However, no one could see the shock in the depths of his eyes. Finally, when Lu Feng's eyes regained their spirituality, The second ancestor smiled. You've succeeded. Lu Feng looked at the second ancestor and nodded gently. Thank you, second ancestor, for your protection over the past 3 months. I've succeeded. The second ancestor smiled gently and waved his arm. You are the bloodline of the Lu family. It is only right that I help you. Lu Feng didn't stand on ceremony. He stood up from the ground. At that moment, he felt that he was even more terrifying. How is it, Lu Feng? How much has your strength increased after comprehending the power of death? Lu Feng didn't answer immediately. Instead, he silently sensed it. After a long time, he finally revealed a trace of a happy smile. My strength has increased a lot. I don't know exactly how much. I'm not sure either. I'll only be able to fully sense it after a satisfying battle. However, after 3 months of consolidation, if I rely on these 5 supreme powers against someone of the same level, I won't be any weaker than the Devil King's clone. The second ancestor's eyes glinted. He naturally knew what Lu Feng's words meant. This meant that Lu Feng was probably comparable to those monstrous geniuses of this era who had comprehended 6 types of supreme forces. The Taboo King is indeed terrifying. The monstrous geniuses of other epochs might not be able to comprehend 6 supreme powers when they reach the end of the battle. However, Lu Feng had obtained the combat strength of 6 supreme powers not long after the Battle of the Kings had begun. This was extremely terrifying and shocking. Chapter 475. After looking around, Lu Feng revealed a puzzled expression. Second ancestor, where did the other patriarchs go? The second ancestor was silent for a moment when he heard Lu Feng's question. Then, a strange expression appeared on his face. He looked at Lu Feng quietly for a long time before saying slowly, in the last 2 months of your comprehension, there was a shocking change in the desolate battlefield of the era. Shocking change? Lu Feng's expression froze. He knew that something that could make an invincible being like the second ancestor say something shocking had to be extremely terrifying. However, Lu Feng did not say much. He knew that since the second ancestor had said so, he would definitely tell him the truth. The second ancestor was silent for a moment before he spoke again. This time there was a shocking change. The changes that appeared in the Great Wilderness Totem have been analyzed by many beings of various races. This is a sign that it is about to recognize a master. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes bulged slightly. Even though he had seen so many things, Lu Feng could not help but feel his mouth go dry. Recognize its master. Lu Feng knew what the Great Wilderness Totem was. Although he did not know how terrifying this heaven-defying artifact was, Lu Feng knew that this was the Great Wilderness Totem. It was very likely to be an artifact that surpassed the 10th grade. It was a true peerless 11th grade artifact. Up until now, Lu Feng had only seen a few traces of a 10th grade artifact. For example, the Tai Sovereign Sword and the Yellow Spring Steel. These were all illusions that the Divine King had condensed. In the Federal University's headquarters, there was also the Divine Fire condensed from the Divine Fire Heaven and Earth. That was also a 10th grade artifact. However, these were still not complete 10th grade artifacts. Up until now, these were the 10th grade artifacts that Lu Feng knew of. This was the first time he had heard of a 10th grade artifact. That's right, it is recognizing a master. Second Patriarch spoke resolutely and decisively. Even he was shocked when he heard this news, let alone Lu Feng. Therefore, when he saw Lu Feng's shocked expression, the second ancestor wasn't surprised at all. Lu Feng, this time, the Lu family needs your help with a mission. Seeing that Lu Feng was still deep in thought, the second ancestor hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. He looked at the second forefather with a puzzled expression. It's like this, Lu Feng. The appearance of the Great Desolate Totem seems to have an inseparable relationship with Wang Zhan. Back then, Many existences wanted to enter the Great Desolation Totem and force it to acknowledge them as its master. However, you should be able to imagine the result. Lu Feng nodded gently. A 10th grade artifact, worthy of being at the level of the Divine King. An 11th grade Great Desolation Totem was a terrifying artifact with the strength of a peak overlord of time. In the present world, other than the Deshur Tian of the monarch race, the Deshur God King, there were no other overlords of time in the universe. The Divine King Dishi Tian was merely a beginner overlord of time. Compared to the Great Desolation Totem, the difference was indescribable. It could be said that the existence of the Great Desolation Totem was completely unsolvable in the current era of the universe. No one could force it to acknowledge them. Therefore, the result was obvious. When he saw Lu Feng's expression, the second ancestor knew that Lu Feng had already thought things through. He chuckled softly. However, this chuckle was laced with endless mockery. That's right. Those existences who tried to challenge the might of the Overlord of Time have all become an eternal past. Among them, there is even an invincible expert at the 9th level of Death Realm, the Life and Death Quasi-King. Lu Feng fell silent. A 9th level Death Boundary Quasi-Monarch. Such an existence would definitely be an invincible overlord in the entire universe. In the current era of the universe, there were only a few Supreme Divine King and otherworldly Supremes. Apart from the Supreme God King, the strongest was the Life and Death Quasi-King. But now, a Life and Death Quasi-King had fallen just like that. Such a thing was definitely a big event that would shock the entire universe. Greed is the ultimate sin. The second ancestor looked at Lu Feng strangely. He hadn't expected that Lu Feng would be able to think of so many things. However, the second ancestor still nodded lightly. Yes, greed is the original sin. No one can break free from its shackles. Even someone as strong as the Divine King was the same. After a moment of silence, Lu Feng looked at the second ancestor and asked slowly. Then, you mean that the master recognition this time is directly related to Wang Zhan's appearance? Lu Feng could already guess some things. After all, the second ancestor's words were rather obvious. The second ancestor nodded lightly. In the past, many supreme and even invincible almighties wanted to enter, but the result was that all of them fell without exception. After that, many heavenly gods, heavenly masters, and true divine masters entered. However, the result was the same. In the end, even the divine spirit master tried to do it. However, they were also annihilated into nothingness. Lu Feng fell silent. In order to try, so many existences had fallen. This was a loss to the universe. After all, the appearance of a divine master could be considered a gift from the universe. The second ancestor fell silent. One had to know that among the existences that had fallen, there were many great existences of the human race. Therefore, his heart was filled with endless sorrow. In the end, someone finally connected the opening of this place to Wang Zhan. Therefore, in the last attempt, many overlord races sent some geniuses to enter. However, some of these people still fell. Even so, there are still some geniuses who have managed to enter. After many deductions, many existences finally came to the conclusion that to enter, one does not have to be a genius or a demonic existence. Anyone below the divine master level can enter. Yes, only existences unrelated to the divine master level can enter. In other words, even a first-layer demigod wouldn't be able to enter it. At this moment, a strange light flashed in Lu Feng's eyes. Only existences below the demigod level could enter. This was indeed good news for him. However, there is a limit to the number of people who can enter. In a month, only 100 existences below the divine master level can enter. Once more than 100 existences enter, no matter who it is, they will be completely annihilated by the great wilderness totem. The 100 existences below the Divine Master level who entered all came out in the end. They once said that the Great Wilderness Totem was filled with layers of tests. Although it was dangerous, it was not fatal. However, if you want to reach the end, you have to be a truly demonic existence. Out of the hundreds of people who entered, only 3 passed the first round and entered the second round. This month is a brand new month. In order not to waste the quota, many races have sealed off the place and not allowed anyone to enter. Every pinnacle Overlord race has a certain quota. And our human race, as the strongest race, has 10 quotas. It's the same for the monarch races. Other than us and the Emperor race, the other Overlord races only have 8 quotas. Of course, the rest belong to the rogue cultivators. According to the agreement between the ancestors of the Lu family, the Federation government, and the Federal University, the Lu family has 3 quotas. You are one of the existences that we have decided on. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. Unless it was a life-threatening danger, he would want to give it a try. Lu Feng understood that any gains and losses were proportional. Even if he was the Taboo King and had the support of the universe's destiny, he would not gain anything if he did not put in any effort. Therefore, in the face of such an opportunity, Lu Feng was willing to give it a try. Second ancestor, I am willing to enter. The second ancestor smiled faintly when he saw Lu Feng's resolute expression. Although he had already said that there would be no danger, they were still going to challenge the dangers set by the Great Wilderness Totem. The previous 100 people had at most made it to the second test. Although they had not died, this did not mean that the situation would be the same later. The unknown was the scariest thing. Lu Feng agreed without hesitation. This made the second ancestor very happy with Lu Feng's reaction. Actually, Lu Feng, there is still a certain amount of risk. Originally, the ancestors did not intend to let you enter. However, those who came out of the Great Wasteland's totem array more or less obtained some benefit. For those few who passed the second stage, their benefits were even more astonishing. In the 1 month after they came out, their strength practically instantly rose by a level. It is also because of this that the ancestors decided to let you enter. When he heard this, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. For the current him, what he lacked the most wasn't comprehending those supreme powers, but increasing his own strength. He knew that besides himself, the other monstrous geniuses and geniuses were also frantically improving themselves. Perhaps among those of the same level, other than the Immortal King and the Demon King, he was already considered invincible. However, when it came to the limit of his combat strength, he couldn't even be considered to be at the peak of the younger generation. Therefore, in order to be truly invincible among the younger generation as soon as possible, Lu Feng needed to frantically increase his strength. Now, even if he was unable to obtain the Great Desolation Totem, Lu Feng would still be happy if he could raise his strength a little during this trip to the Great Desolation Totem. Then, let's go, second ancestor. Now that I have comprehended the 5th power of death, my body's power has increased once again. Now, even if I face the Immortal King of the past, once I activate both my souls, I will not be afraid of anything. Lu Feng was already confident enough to face the Immortal King that he had seen in the past. Although he knew that the Immortal King back then was not a complete Immortal King, Lu Feng had also not reached the Great Completion Realm. Therefore, even if he met the Immortal King or the Demon King in the future, he would not be afraid of anything. Seeing Lu Feng's confident expression, the second ancestor smiled and nodded. Chapter 476. In that case, let's set off. It is impossible to travel through space in this desolate era battlefield. Even if I move at full speed, it will take me at least 3 days to reach the center of the battlefield. You can focus on consolidating your cultivation in these 3 days. I will wake you up when we reach the center in 3 days. Lu Feng nodded his head gently and started consolidating his cultivation without wasting any more time. Lu Feng knew that he was about to face the younger generation of all the races in the universe. Although not all of them were the strongest, there were already a lot of them. Lu Feng wouldn't care if they were at the same level as him, but he couldn't do anything when he encountered those monstrous geniuses who were way ahead of him. Therefore, he had to make the best use of his time to cultivate so that he could be in his peak condition. Lu Feng spent the 3 days cultivating and consolidating his cultivation. The second ancestor used a terrifying power to carry Lu Feng. Their speed almost reached a tangible level. In just an instant they had crossed thousands of miles. After 3 days, Lu Feng was finally awakened by the second ancestor. "Is this the great desolate totem?" Lu Feng's heart trembled slightly as he looked at the terrifying pillar in front of him that he couldn't even see the top of. That's right. This is the most terrifying supreme weapon that many great beings of the desolate era had tried their best to condense. It is said to be a grade 11 weapon that surpassed the Divine King's martial path incarnation, the Great Desolate Totem. The second ancestor's eyes were filled with shock. Although someone had sent him an image of the Great Desolate Totem, seeing it through someone else's image was completely different from seeing it with his own eyes. Although he was now comparable to any heaven-defying and invincible Almighty, the second ancestor still trembled when he saw this terrifying structure. Terrifying, it is really terrifying. Facing it, I actually felt a kind of terrifying majesty. It is as if this is not a weapon, but an ancient overlord that has been sleeping for an unknown number of years. Lu Feng did not try to hide anything. The feeling that the Great Desolation Totem gave him was simply too terrifying. He simply couldn't suppress the emotions in his heart. In the distance, there was an ancient totem that truly reached the heavens. It was incomparably complex and mysterious. It was Lu Feng's first time seeing what was engraved on the totem. What is the real body of the totem carved or constructed by the Great Wilderness Totem? There was a strange light in the second ancestor's eyes as he gazed at the towering totem in the distance that was filled with a peerlessly ferocious and majestic aura. When he heard Lu Feng's words, he slowly said, "The existence of the Great Wilderness Totem has been gradually discovered by many beings. The true form of the Great Desolation Totem is a kind of totem. What's engraved on this totem seems to be a terrifying beast from ancient times, the Great Desolation Beast." Prehistoric beasts? Lu Feng frowned slightly, but in the next moment, a strange light appeared in his eyes. Prehistoric giant beast? Legend has it that during the primordial immortal demon era, the original bodies of many divine and sacred beasts were the Great Desolation Beasts that had existed since the birth of this universe? The second ancestor glanced at Lu Feng in surprise. He hadn't expected Lu Feng to actually know about the Great Desolation Beast. However, he still nodded gently. Yes, countless divine, sacred, and immortal beasts appeared during the primordial immortal demon era. However, these existences were all descendants of the 3 Great Desolation Beasts. The 3 Great Desolation Beasts are the primordial sacred beasts, the Great Desolation Beasts, and the final Beast King. The original engraved on this totem is the Great Desolation Beasts. Lu Feng nodded gently. Back then, Jiahua Wuyue had also told him about the terrifying Great Desolation Beasts of the primordial immortal demon era. One had to know that the sacred race's history spanned many eras. Their historical records were much more profound than the human race's. Therefore, what Jiahua Wuyue had said should be true. Desolation, the Desolation Era. Although there are many things named Desolation in the future, only the Desolation Era can truly bear the name Desolation. After all, Desolation is another name for the Great Desolation Beast. The two of them pondered for a moment. They were completely stunned by the towering Great Desolation Totem in front of them. One had to know that this place was at least 10,000 miles away from the Great Desolation Totem's original body. However, even though they were 1,000,000 miles away, they could still clearly see the terrifying Great Desolation Totem's original body. This meant that the Great Desolation Totem's original body was at least 10,000 miles in size. Alright, let's hurry over. It's almost a month before the opening. Lu Feng nodded gently. In an instant, Lu Feng was pulled by the second ancestor and disappeared from the spot. The Great Desolation Totem's original body was growing larger and clearer. The countless living beings that had gathered in front of the Great Desolation Totem's original body gradually entered Lu Feng's eyes. As the two of them moved forward, Lu Feng could clearly see that there were existences descending from all directions. These people were basically like Lu Feng, led by terrifying experts to gather in the center. These are the monstrous talents and geniuses of the peak races. You have to know that it's not just you. Many existences want to enter the Great Desolation Totem to accept the inheritance test. After all, even if you fail, there won't be any danger to your life. In fact, there will be shocking benefits. This kind of opportunity doesn't come by every day. Lu Feng nodded gently. The test of the Great Desolation Totem was the same as the true core of the Massacre Abyss. Although one might not be able to make it to the end, just the process alone would allow one to obtain countless benefit. In the Massacre Abyss, one had to become the Massacre Emperor in order to be qualified to enter the Massacre Abyss. However, in this place the requirements were slightly lower. Therefore, it was reasonable for so many geniuses and monstrous talents to gather here. In the next moment, the two of them slowly descended from the void. This is the human race's camp. In fact, Lu Feng already knew that this was the human race's camp even without the second ancestor's introduction. Although these peak overlords looked very similar to humans, there were still some differences between each race that could be seen at a glance. By the time Lu Feng landed, he had already walked past dozens of existences. Among them, Lu Feng recognized 12 of them. They were the 12 primogenitors of the Lu family who had come here with Lu Feng. In addition to them, Lu Feng also sensed some bloodline fluctuations from the other existences that had arrived. After pondering for a moment, Lu Feng understood. He knew that these people should be of the Lu family's bloodline. However, they were not of the Lu family's direct bloodline. Sure enough, besides the 12 primogenitors of the Lu family, the other powerhouses all bowed respectfully when they saw Lu Feng. "Greetings, young master." If he had been an ordinary young master, there would have been no need for them to act this way. After all, they were all terrifying powerhouses. Even the weakest among them was a true god. However, Lu Feng was different from those young masters. He was the first young master in the history of the Lu family to have the same authority as the family head. He was the young master that the primogenitor of the Lu family had personally paid attention to. In the Lu family, Lu Feng's status was equivalent to the family head's. However, everyone in the Lu family understood that Lu Feng's existence was much more important than the Lu family's family head. When they heard this voice, many people in the surroundings turned their attention over. After all, if a young master could make so many powerhouses greet him respectfully, then Lu Feng's status must be indescribably noble. However, even after looking at Lu Feng for a long time, they still could not recognize him. After shaking their heads slightly, the people who had been paying attention to him gave up on the idea of continuing to observe him. Lu Feng was not a person who liked to be manipulated. Thus, when he saw these people bow respectfully, he turned slightly and avoided them. Seeing this scene, a strange look appeared in the eyes of these people. "Primogenitors, please get up. I am just a junior of the Lu family. You don't have to do this." Lu Feng's words rang out at the right time. Lu Feng had never placed himself in a lofty position. Right now, what he valued most was strength. Only those who were powerful were honorable existences. When they heard Lu Feng's words, the primogenitors got up one after another. At that moment, the second patriarch's voice was heard. What's the current situation like? When he heard the second patriarch's words, an almighty primogenitor of the Lu family stepped forward and said, "The situation here is very chaotic. For the sake of obtaining a spot to enter this time, the various races have clashed a few times. After all, many people hope to enter, but there are only a few spots. Thus, these clashes are unavoidable. The underworld race tried to cause trouble for the human race before, but fortunately, the Spirit King of the Federation government was present, so the underworld race was forced to retreat in defeat. When the other races saw the Spirit King appear, they gave up on the idea of causing trouble for the human race. In the end, the 10 spots for the human race have been decided." The second patriarch nodded with a smile. He knew that if the Spirit King was present, it would be relatively easy for him to keep these foreign supreme experts or even invincible experts at bay. After all, the Spirit King was publicly acknowledged as the quasi-monarch who was closest to the Divine King and the Heretic Path sovereigns. Then are the 10 spots for the human race still going according to the previous rules? The Lu family ancestor nodded gently. It's not just the human race. The other races haven't changed either. Among the 9 peak Overlord races, the human race has 10 spots. The sovereign race also has 10 spots. Aside from us and the sovereign race, the War God clan, the underworld race, the blood race, the origin race, the sky demon race, the celestial race and the sacred path race each have 8 spots. The remaining 24 spots belong to the independent cultivators of the foreign battlefields. And the most intense competition is for the 24 loose cultivator spot. This kind of situation was actually within his calculations. After all, the competition in the foreign battlefields was extremely intense. How could they give up on such an opportunity to obtain a legacy? Everyone wanted to go, but unfortunately, not everyone had the right to go. As a result, there would definitely be crazy battles before the spots were decided. Additionally, the 24 people from the origin race, the celestial race and the War God clan have already entered. The human race is basically complete. We're just waiting for Lu Feng to arrive. The second patriarch smiled when he heard that. Then, let's head to where the human race is gathered and prepare to enter. Everyone smiled faintly. Many existences clustered around Lu Feng as they walked in a certain direction. Chapter 477. Why does the Lu family always get all these privileges? You should know that the human race isn't part of the Lu family. The human race's current achievements weren't entirely supported by the Lu family alone. Besides the human monarch of the Lu family, what other contributions has the Lu family made to the human race? The so-called top 3 factions of the human race are just a bunch of selfish clans. Lu Feng heard a huge commotion from far away. Furthermore, the commotion was directed at the Lu family. At this moment, Lu Feng frowned slightly. He glanced at the second patriarch and the other patriarchs beside him. Unfortunately, they didn't seem to have heard anything as they continued walking forward. Lu Feng knew that if he had heard everything clearly, how could these patriarchs, who were many times stronger than him, not hear anything? Although he was very confused, Lu Feng naturally couldn't say anything since these elders hadn't said anything. Therefore, Lu Feng also lowered his head and walked towards the gathering place in silence. Wait. We have to wait. The geniuses of the human race were the first to arrive, but the Source race, Heavenly race, and Battle God race have already entered. Even the Underworld race, and some unaffiliated cultivators have already entered. You should know that all the people who have entered are monsters. It's hard to say if one of them won't be able to obtain the inheritance. If the other races really get their hands on it, can you bear the responsibility? As they got closer, their voices became more and more ear-piercing. Lu Feng's brows were tightly knitted together. He looked at the patriarchs beside him, but Lu Feng was surprised to find that the patriarchs were nowhere to be seen. This scene made Lu Feng even more puzzled. Looking at the place where over 1,000 people were gathered, Lu Feng finally shook his head lightly and walked over. At this moment there were 9 people sitting quietly in the middle of the field. Lu Feng could clearly sense 2 familiar auras from these 9 people. This didn't mean that Lu Feng had seen these 2 before, but that their bloodline auras were extremely similar to his. In other words, these 2 were 2 of the 3 people the Lu family wanted to enter this place. Not being able to see Lu Luo was within Lu Feng's expectations. After all, Lu Luo had already been a peak-perfect martialist when he had seen him a year ago. After a year, given Lu Luo's talent, he should have already reached the 2nd or 3rd level of the demigod realm, or even the peak of the demigod realm. 8 of the 9 people were sitting quietly in the field. However, one of them stood in the middle and spoke without the slightest scruple. Lu Feng could tell that the words had come from this person. Back then, the Yuyo family's ancestor, the Divine King, paid a huge price for the human race to become the #1 race in the world. The Yuyo family has also paid a huge price for the human race to become what it is today. We are both of the Divine King's bloodline, so why hasn't the Yuyo family done anything like the Lu family? Isn't the Lu family a little too much? Lu Feng's frown deepened. He finally knew the identity of the person who had spoken. He was the only one of the 8 great Divine King families of the human race that could compete with the Lu family. The Divine King's bloodline was the Yuyo family. The Yuyo family and the human king's Lu family were always competing for the title of the #1 family in the world. This was something everyone knew. Most of the time, the Lu family and the Yuyo family didn't get along well. On the surface, the human king's Lu family was very low-key. This caused the Yuyo family to really compete with the Lu family on the surface. Of course, this so-called surface was only seen by ordinary people. Anyone who had cultivated to the level of a martialist or a telekinesis grandmaster would understand that the Yuyo family was much stronger than the other Divine King families. They weren't inferior to the many ancient Divine King families in the universe. However, compared to the human king's Lu family, they were still a far cry. Just the fact that they were of variant path supremacy was enough. When Lu Feng was about to walk in, he saw a bloodline member of the Lu family stand up. Yuyo Qijian, are you done yet? You have been incessant since the beginning. Do you think that there are rules? Do you think that just because my big brother Lu Luo isn't here, you can do whatever you want? Yuyo Qijian sneered when he heard this. That's right. In the Divine King's bloodline, the younger generation has to settle their own conflicts. I like this rule very much. I like it very much. Who asked your Lu family to be so useless? Dongwang Lu Luo is the only exception. If you don't like it, you can challenge me. I am right here waiting for your challenge. If you don't think you can do it, I will let the 2 of you fight together. Yuyo Qijian's mocking expression became even more obvious after he said this. When he saw the 2 members of the Lu family suppressing their anger and not making a move, Yuyo Qijian added another sentence. If you still don't think you can do it, I will lower my cultivation level to the same level as yours. That should be enough, right? This was undoubtedly a slap in the face. The human king's bloodline was said to be invincible among those of the same level. Of course, this was only true under normal circumstances. However, this was one of the proudest things of the human king's Lu family. After all, the human king's bloodline was said to be the #1 bloodline in the universe. Now, Yuyo Qijian wanted to lower himself to the same level as the human king's bloodline so that he could single-handedly take on 2 members of the human king's Lu family. This was a slap in the face. Unfortunately, the 2 members of the Lu family could only continue to endure. They couldn't say anything. Beside them, many people in the crowd shot them strange looks. Under these gazes, the 2 of them felt even more ashamed and indignant. One of the members of the Lu family couldn't bear it any longer and wanted to make a move. However, when he raised his arm, he was pulled back by his older brother. When he saw his older brother shake his head slightly, Although he was infuriated, the Lu family's bloodline ultimately suppressed it. I am really puzzled. What's wrong with the Lu family? Isn't it said to be invincible among those of the same level? Doesn't the Lu family have a genius called? At this point, Yu Chi pretended to be deep in thought. After a while, he clapped his hands and suddenly shouted. That's right. Isn't he called the Emperor? Isn't he said to be invincible in the same level? Isn't he called the Taboo Monarch? Then tell him to come. If he's at the same level, I'll wait for him to make a move. His voice was getting more and more arrogant. Faintly, there was a terrifying aura of disdain for the world. Lu Feng stood quietly in the middle of the crowd, a cold smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. At this moment, Lu Feng really had the urge to make a move. Lu Feng didn't have much affection for these so-called cousins of his. However, the other party had provoked him, so Lu Feng had the urge to make a move. Yu Qijian's strength wasn't that terrifying. He was only at the initial perfect stage. Unless he was a taboo monarch like the immortal monarch or the demon monarch, Lu Feng didn't even need to use his two souls to suppress such an existence. However, he didn't make a move. He wanted to see if his two cousins were really so cowardly that they didn't even dare to make a move after being bullied. After a while, the older brother who held back the Lu family's bloodline finally took a deep breath and said, Yu Qijian, that's enough. Many of the surrounding people gently shook their heads. They were gradually not used to these words. Although they were somewhat dissatisfied that they were only waiting for the arrival of the last member of the Lu family, they were still somewhat dissatisfied. However, these words were still a little too much. When he heard this, Yu Qijian suddenly laughed. It was a mocking laugh. Enough? How is that enough? I really don't know how the Lu family did it. I even suspect that the existence of this generation of the Lu family is just a random person from outside the Lu family. Everyone's bloodline is so thin. Even Lu Luo is just a little more talented. If not, how could he and my cousin be side by side as the East and West Kings? In the Divine King clan, the most important thing was bloodline density. It could be said that among the descendants of the Divine King clan, bloodline was the most important thing, while aptitude was the second. Therefore, the other 7 Divine King clans of the human race looked at the thin bloodline density of this generation of the Lu family with strange eyes. Of course, it was precisely because of this reason that Yu Qian dared to mock these 2 direct descendants of the Lu clan in such an unbridled manner. At the moment, nobody tried to persuade him or say anything. Although they didn't like this kind of scene, the descendants of the human race were also very dissatisfied with the human king Lu family. In the past, when the younger generation had met, this kind of situation had often occurred. Although it hadn't been as impudent as this time, they had gradually gotten used to it after a long time. Everyone was watching quietly. However, no one could see that the figure beside them was clenching his fists. Looking at his 2 cousins who were receiving strange gazes from the crowd, Lu Feng didn't feel humiliated. Instead, he felt guilty. The last sentence made Lu Feng's heart tremble. Lu Feng still felt a little conflicted about the human king Lu family. This was because his cousins had bullied him when he was a child. If they hadn't gone overboard, how could Lu Feng have been taken away by Lu Tao and left the Lu family? Therefore, although Lu Feng had already reached a new height that was enough to make the universe tremble, he still hadn't let go of his obsession with the Lu family. Lu Feng had originally thought that he might have already acknowledged the Lu family's status as a descendant of the Lu family. However, he would never forgive his siblings of this generation of the Lu family. However, Lu Feng now realized that he was wrong. In the past, Lu Feng had only cared about his own suffering and pain. He had never thought about others. When he had been bullied, he had clearly remembered the faces of the people who had bullied him. He had clearly remembered the expressions on their faces when they had bullied him. However, he didn't know what had been hidden behind the people who had bullied him. If it hadn't been for my existence, or if they had all been favored by the younger generation, they would have been able to dazzle the world and be worshipped by billions. If he hadn't extracted their bloodline and caused them to lose what they were most proud of, how could they have suffered such humiliation? I only thought of myself, but I never thought of them. Am I being too selfish? Lu Feng's heart was trembling nonstop. He knew that everything that had happened was because he had been too self-centered. He had only thought about himself. He had never considered the feelings of others. He had only seen the pain that others had made him suffer, but he had never seen the pain that others had suffered because of him. As he thought about this, Lu Feng's fists clenched even tighter. However, in his heart, Lu Feng felt unprecedentedly relaxed. When he had thought everything through, Lu Feng suddenly realized that some kind of shackle in his heart had been shattered. It seemed like another obstacle had disappeared. Relax. At this moment, Lu Feng felt an unprecedented sense of relaxation. He had never thought that he would have such a day. Perhaps no one is wrong. I don't actually have the right to blame them. A faint smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. Lu Feng suddenly realized that he didn't feel any resentment towards the Lu family anymore. Chapter 478. Looking at the two people in the arena whose faces were already flushed red, Lu Feng could not bear to see them like this. At this moment, he finally understood why the two of them would rather endure such humiliation than make a move. They weren't cowards. They just couldn't make a move. Without the human king's bloodline, they were simply not Yuyo Qijian's match in the same realm. If they made a move, then Yuyo Qijian had already raised the issue of bloodline. If they lost, the entire human king Lu family would be humiliated. They would rather be seen as cowards and bear the infamy of being trash than let their family's glory wither in the slightest, let their family be covered in the slightest bit of dust. They were the bloodline of the Lu family. Although they were important in their hearts, that was nothing compared to the name of the Lu family. Because in their hearts, the Lu family was the one that could not be offended. It was the greatest honor. What? You still don't dare? I knew it. The Lu family is a bunch of cowards. You're just a bunch of trash. This time, you're only allowed to enter because of the Lu family's status. You can't even be considered a supporting role. You have to be clear about your own position. He looked at the two members of the Lu family with disdain. Others might be afraid of the Lu family, but as a direct descendant of the Yuyo family, Yuyo Qijian wasn't afraid at all. Plus, the divine king of the human race had certain restrictions. Unless it involved the safety of the family, the elders couldn't interfere. It was also because of this that Yu Qi was so unbridled this time. After all, he wasn't afraid of the younger generation of the Lu family. Looking at the two of them, Yuyo Qijian seemed to have thought of something. He pressed on, step by step. Can you give me a reason? What right does the Lu family have to make me wait? The two members of the Lu family were already pale. What right do they have to make so many people wait? Because they were the bloodline of the Lu family. Looking at the increasingly aggressive Yuyo Qijian, Lu Feng finally smiled. But this smile was so strange and incomprehensible. Finally, Lu Feng lowered his head and muttered to himself, "Second ancestor, this is what you wanted me to see, right? I saw it. I really saw it all. Then, what reason do you want?" Just when Yuyo Qijian was at his proudest, a voice suddenly rang out. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on him. In the human race, the strongest family was the human king Lu family. Apart from the Lu family, the Yuyo family was second. Now, the Lu clan's disciples had nothing to say. The one who spoke was the Yuyo clan. But there was actually a human who dared to interrupt the Yuyo family's member. This was simply courting death. Looking at Lu Feng, who was slowly walking out, other than the two direct descendants of the Lu clan, everyone had a strange expression on their faces. What reason? I don't want a reason. I just want a reason that will allow me to wait here peacefully for the human king Lu family's future member. Yu Qijin looked at Lu Feng with a mocking expression. However, there was a trace of seriousness in his mocking eyes, because he found that he couldn't see through Lu Feng. Hearing this, Lu Feng didn't stop, he continued walking towards the center. He nodded his head lightly. When he was about to reach Yu Qijin, the voice rang out again. You want this kind of reason? Then, I'll give you. At this moment, Lu Feng's lips curled into a smile. It was a strange smile. These people didn't understand. They weren't the ones who understood. The Lu family caused chaos in the human race for 500 years. Is this reason acceptable? With one step, a terrifying aura appeared, causing everyone's expression to change greatly. This kind of aura couldn't be described with the word terrifying anymore. But this wasn't the end, because Lu Feng had already raised his other step. The Lu family's ancestor, in order to protect the human race, fought against the foreign race's supremes and fell into a deathly stillness. Is this reason acceptable? The second step landed. The terrifying aura had already covered the heaven and earth, causing everyone to be horrified. Yu Qijin, who was in the middle of this aura, finally showed a terrified expression. Under the cover of this terrifying aura, he actually had the thought of fear. But this wasn't the end, it still wasn't over, because Lu Feng had already raised his third step. The Lu family deterred the other supremes, allowing the human race to live peacefully until today. Is this reason acceptable? When the third step landed, Yu Qijin actually took a step back abruptly. But he didn't care about this anymore. Yu Qijin's face was completely pale. He couldn't even move. Finally, after 3 steps, Lu Feng stopped. His smile became even more radiant. Quietly looking at Yu Qijin, Lu Feng seemed to be in deep thought. After a while, he raised his foot again. It seems like you're very dissatisfied with these 3 reasons. Then, I'll give you the 4th one. If you're still dissatisfied with this 4th reason, then I really have no other way. After saying this, Lu Feng even stretched out his hands, making a helpless expression. But no one smiled at Lu Feng's actions or Lu Feng's words. The current Lu Feng was simply too terrifying in their eyes. He was so terrifying that they couldn't even react in the slightest. Finally, the 4th step was taken. Lu Feng's voice slowly came out. But this time, Lu Feng's voice seemed to have gone through some kind of amplification, allowing everyone to hear him clearly. The last reason is that I can easily suppress you into nothingness. Whether we're at the same level, or if I'm one level lower than you, I can completely crush you. I don't care if you're convinced or not, I'm going to make you agree. If you don't agree, I will suppress you, completely suppress you. I don't know if this reason is enough. After the last step, Yu Qijin's face turned slightly red. In the next moment, a trace of red appeared at the corner of his mouth. Everyone looked at Lu Feng in shock. Vaguely, some of them have already guessed Lu Feng's identity. After all, only he could be this terrifying in the human race. Overbearing. This was overbearing. This was the most arrogant kind of overbearing. However, he had the right to be so overbearing. When Lu Feng appeared, the 2 Lu family's direct descendants already knew Lu Feng's identity. Lu Feng was undoubtedly of the Lu family's bloodline. This was something they could easily sense through their bloodline. They were very familiar with the Lu family's direct descendants. The sudden appearance of this unfamiliar face could only belong to the most famous member of the Lu family. The 2 of them looked at Lu Feng with complicated expressions. They wanted to say something but couldn't. At this moment, Lu Feng had already arrived in front of the 2 of them with a smile on his face. At this moment, 6 pairs of eyes met, and the 3 of them became silent. Finally, it was Lu Feng who spoke. My 2 cousins, I'm sorry I'm late. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm a little late this time. Because of me, the 2 of you have been treated this way. I'm sorry I'm late. Because of me, the 2 of you have been humiliated like this. I should have come earlier. When they heard Lu Feng's apologetic words, the 2 of them fell completely silent. They could already hear the meaning behind Lu Feng's words. They could hear the deep regret in Lu Feng's voice. Time seemed to pass forever. After a long time, the elder brother's expression changed. It was a smile of relief, a smile of forgetting. It was also a smile of being slightly moved and moved. Cousin, you're not late. You didn't do anything wrong. We didn't do anything wrong either. However, we were both wrong. The people around them were puzzled by his words. They would never understand the meaning behind his words. Only the members of the Lu family and the direct descendants of the Lu family could understand everything. You didn't do anything wrong. Everything related to the bloodline wasn't your fault. It was arranged by the elders. It was the same for us. We didn't do anything wrong either. However, we were all wrong. We were wrong to hold grudges against you. We used to bully you. It was our fault. As for you, you held grudges against us and always blamed everything on us. Therefore, you were also wrong. It was very profound and filled with a profound feeling. However, the three of them understood. At this moment Lu Feng smiled. This was a genuine smile, a smile that carried a hint of relief. Yes, we weren't wrong. However, we were all wrong. Since we weren't wrong from today onwards, let's forget everything. The three of them gently nodded their heads. At this moment, the six of them looked at each other and a smile appeared. It was a smile. After a long time, the last shackle in Lu Feng's heart was completely released at this moment. Finally, when the laughter stopped, Lu Feng turned around and looked at Yu Qijian, whose face was pale and whose blood had just been wiped clean. The smile was no longer there. This time, Lu Feng's face was extremely cold. It was indescribable. Lu Feng looked at Yu Qijian and asked slowly, I don't know. Is my reason okay? Of course. If it's not okay, I will take action and suppress you. After all, this is your request. Chapter 479. Lu Feng's words were too overbearing. Even the spectators felt their blood boiling. Don't agree? Then I'll take action and suppress you. You can only agree. This time, it was Yu Qi's turn to look at Lu Feng with resentment. However, Lu Feng sneered when he saw the resentment in Yu Qi's eyes. Are you angry? If you really think you're good, then let's have a battle of the same level. I can let you find 10 more or even 100 more. Do you dare to do it? Many people sucked in a deep breath of cold air. At this moment, even an idiot could guess Lu Feng's identity. Lu Feng's words were similar to what Yu Qi had said before. However, Lu Feng's words were more overbearing and extreme. However, these people did not dare to doubt the authenticity of Lu Feng's words. If Yu Qi could really find 100 people of the same level, then Lu Feng would really dare to fight. Previously, when Lu Feng used the identity of Psyche Master Futu to fight against many experts, these people knew about it. At that time, those who challenged Lu Feng were all 2 or even 3 levels higher than him. Moreover, they were all monstrous geniuses. But in the end, more than 100 of them were directly suppressed into nothingness by Lu Feng, who was only a Psyche Master. The number of monstrous geniuses that fell in that battle was the highest since the start of the Battle of the Kings. And it was also at that time that many people finally witnessed Lu Feng's terrifying killing power. Now, when Lu Feng said such words again, no one dared to refute or attack. Because they knew that once they fought, the result would be death. Looking at Yu Qi with ridicule, Lu Feng suddenly smiled and continued, In that case, I'll let you use your full strength. Is that okay? I can even let you find 100, no, 1,000 people of the same level as you. I'll challenge 1,000 of you. Do you still dare? Terrifying. Terrifying. Extremely terrifying. Overbearing. Domineering. Incomparably domineering. Compared to before, this was true dominance and strength. At this moment, Lu Feng finally showed these people what it meant to be domineering, Since you don't dare to fight me in the same level, Then, I'll let you fight me with strength higher than mine. If you still don't dare, I won't let you find 100 people. I'll let you find 1,000 people, 1,000 monstrous geniuses. Do you dare or not? Many existences were dumbfounded. However, they still did not doubt whether Lu Feng could really do it. Green sky. It was unknown who said those words softly, but at this moment, everyone was trembling all over. Green sky, that was Lu Feng's signature move. It was a supreme, immortal technique. When Lu Feng used it, he could summon a piece of heaven with a wave of his hand, suppressing countless people in an instant. Many people believed that not to mention 1,000 monstrous geniuses, even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of them, they would definitely not be Lu Feng's opponent. Everyone knew that under the green sky, with Lu Feng's current cultivation, it was almost equivalent to a fourth-level demigod. Furthermore, the green firmament sky was a place where peak demigods had taken action. Moreover, if one piece of heaven was not enough, then he would use 2 pieces, 3 pieces. Until now, no one knew where Lu Feng's limit was. No one knew how many pieces of heaven Lu Feng could summon. But they knew that if there were 1,000 people, there would definitely not be a single person who could last until Lu Feng's third piece of heaven. Seeing that Yu Qi was no longer gloomy and expressionless, Lu Feng's smile was no longer as cold and mocking as before. The current him was basically expressionless. In the end, Lu Feng turned around and scanned the crowd one by one. Everyone who was swept by Lu Feng's gaze was slightly stunned. No one dared to look at Lu Feng. Seeing this scene, the hearts of the 2 direct descendants of the Lu family trembled slightly. There was an unconcealable excitement in their eyes. How long had it been since they had seen such a scene? How long had it been since they had imagined it? As the number 1 bloodline in the world, when they faced the descendants of the Divine King, all they saw was mockery and disdain. Perhaps when the Eastern Emperor of the Lu family, Lu Luo, was present, these people would no longer mock them. However, it was just an unspoken mockery. In the depths of their eyes, the descendants of the Lu family could still see the disdain in them. This was also why the direct descendants of the Lu family rarely participated in public gatherings. Now, they could clearly see that the eyes of the people around them were filled with endless reverence. This was not an act. It was a kind of fear that came from the depths of their hearts. They were truly afraid. When Lu Feng's gaze swept over them, he finally stood still in the middle of the field. His voice resounded throughout the entire place. The human monarch bloodline is the number 1 bloodline in the world. Everyone has to be treated with the utmost respect. I don't care whose bloodline you belong to or who your elders are. If you don't acknowledge me, then you can request a battle. I accept any challenge from anyone of the same level. As long as you can defeat me, I will take back my previous words. If you can't, then from now on, whenever you see a descendant of the Lu family, you have to treat me with the utmost respect. If you don't, Lu Feng's voice trailed off slowly. Suddenly, a terrifying glint appeared in his eyes. Everyone that Lu Feng's gaze swept over felt as if their hearts were about to stop. They were shrouded in an endless panic. Then I will personally take action. I don't care what your identity is. I will personally take action. I will beat you up until you admit your identity. Domineering. Lu Feng's words were still as domineering as before. If anyone refused to admit it, then he would take action forcefully. He would beat them up until they had no choice but to admit it. Countless people fell silent. If this had been any other time, they would have ganged up on him. However, now that they were facing Lu Feng, they all understood that ganging up on him was just a joke. The 3 words, green underworld sky, had always been a real sky that had deeply suppressed their hearts. When he saw that nobody was saying anything, Lu Feng didn't look at these people anymore. Instead, he walked over to the 2 excited descendants of the Lu family. Let's go, my 2 cousins. As soon as he said this, Lu Feng had already started walking forward. When Lu Feng had said those words, he had already seen the figures of the Lu family's patriarchs in the distance. The two descendants of the Lu family exchanged a glance before nodding their heads gently. They knew that Lu Feng's existence had already become inevitable. This was something that couldn't be changed. Previously, they hadn't been willing to accept Lu Feng. Besides the contradictions in their hearts, they had also disapproved of Lu Feng. However, now that Lu Feng had used his current status as the taboo monarch to do this, there was no need to say anything more. All the dissatisfaction and estrangement from before had completely disappeared. They no longer existed. Deep down, they still found it difficult to accept the fact that they had extracted their own bloodline and given it to Lu Feng. However, it was already too late. They also understood that Lu Feng was much more important than 100 or 1,000 descendants of the Lu family. Eventually, the three of them arrived before the Lu family's patriarch. Lu Feng smiled back at the second patriarch, who was smiling faintly. "Are you satisfied with this outcome, second patriarch?" Lu Feng had also heard that there was some sort of agreement that prevented the elders from taking action. However, how could the Lu family's patriarch tolerate these people insulting the Lu family? The fact that they had all disappeared meant that Lu Feng had to deal with this matter himself. That was why this was the first thing Lu Feng asked when he met the second patriarch. The second patriarch's smile never wavered. He stared at Lu Feng for a long time before he said slowly, "Lu Feng, I know that you have some grievances in your heart. I don't blame you for this. However, can you understand how the descendants of the Lu family feel?" Lu Feng was silent. Although Lu Feng could accept the second patriarch's actions logically, he still felt that he had been tricked. However, deep down, Lu Feng still felt as though he had been schemed against. When he heard the second patriarch's words, Lu Feng fell silent. This was because, just as the second ancestor had said, Lu Feng had never considered things from the perspective of those people. He'd always viewed everything from his own point of view. After a long time, Lu Feng sighed deeply. A smile reappeared on his face. "Second Patriarch, I understand, just a few simple words were enough to explain everything." The second Patriarch's smile grew even more pronounced. A moment later, he looked at the two members of the Lu family next to Lu Feng and said, "Of these two, one is your eldest uncle's son, Lu Luo's younger brother. His name is Lu Yun." Lu Yun was the somewhat impulsive younger brother from before. Lu Feng had a good impression of Lu Yun. Although Lu Yun's impulsiveness had only embarrassed the Lu family even more back then. However, his hot-bloodedness and impulsiveness were exactly what Lu Feng liked and appreciated. Nodding gently, Lu Feng didn't say anything unnecessary. He only said coolly, "Cousin Lu Yun, let's write off the past. In the future, please take care of me." He knew that Lu Feng was referring to things that had happened a long, long time ago. They'd bullied Lu Feng when they were young. Since Lu Feng was willing to write off the past, Lu Yun naturally didn't want to pursue the matter. He smiled faintly and looked directly at Lu Feng. "In the future, please take care of me." The two of them smiled at each other. The second patriarch pointed at the person next to Lu Yun. "This is your second uncle's only son, Lu Ming. He's the second genius of the Lu family's younger generation, second only to Lu Luo." Lu Feng nodded gently and said the same thing. Lu Ming was much, much more mature than Lu Yun. Therefore, his answer wasn't as simple as Lu Yun's. Lu Ming finally stopped after saying a few words that eased Lu Feng's heart. The second patriarch's smile grew even more radiant when he saw the three's attitudes. Originally, matters between the younger generation had nothing to do with him. After all, he was the second patriarch of the Lu family and the second most respected person in the Lu family after the founding ancestor. This was just a matter of the younger generation. It was simply not something that could reach his level. However, he had no choice but to step in this time. The Lu family didn't want any rift between them and Lu Feng. Alright, now that we've entered the great wilderness totem, we'll listen to Lu Yun's orders. For now, we'll listen to Lu Feng. Do you have any questions? The second patriarch's words were clear. They had to listen to Lu Feng. Lu Yun and Lu Ming didn't even look at each other when they heard this. They immediately bowed respectfully and shouted, "As you command, second patriarch." Chapter 480. Being able to meet the second ancestor was already a great fortune. They knew that if it weren't for the fact that the Lu family had 3 spots and that only those below the demigod realm could enter, they wouldn't have had a chance to meet the second ancestor. The two of them had great respect for this legendary existence, who had once competed with godly King Placid Chaos. They didn't want to go against his words. Moreover, they had already approved of Lu Feng's performance earlier. Therefore, the two of them did not have any objections at all. Seeing this, the second ancestor nodded lightly. "Alright, you guys can go. Up ahead is the entrance. The invincible Spirit King of our human race is already waiting there." The 3 of them glanced at each other and walked towards the entrance without any hesitation. There weren't many young people left at the entrance. There were only 7 figures standing there. Aside from them, there were the experts of the human race and some of the younger members of the foreign races. Seeing the arrival of Lu Feng and the other 2, everyone's eyes focused on them. The 7 experts of the human race had all witnessed how domineering Lu Feng was. They saw how Lu Feng's aura alone made Yu Qi tremble. Therefore, they were extremely wary of Lu Feng. After all, Lu Feng's reputation as the god of slaughter wasn't just for show. Yu Qi saw that when Lu Feng arrived, he kept his head lowered. He was now in awe of Lu Feng from the bottom of his heart. Lu Feng was simply too terrifying, too powerful. There was no way to defeat him. Although Lu Feng hadn't even reached the perfect stage, Yu Qi understood that Lu Feng's true strength couldn't be measured like this. Once he unleashed his full strength, there was probably no existence below the demigod realm that could compare to him. Lu Feng completely ignored the 7 of them. There was only one existence in his eyes right now. "You've come into being." Lu Feng had a strange smile on his face as he looked at the figure in the center of the group. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the figure fell silent. After a while, he slowly walked out of everyone's protection. "You guys have already caused such a huge commotion. If I don't come into being, then I don't need to come into being." Hearing this, Lu Feng smiled and nodded without any hesitation. "Indeed. Immortal kings and demon kings are too strong. I, the Emperor, will not lose to anyone. The 3 of us are enough to look down on the younger generation. If it had been a little later, you wouldn't have needed to come into being either." Lu Feng's words were extremely arrogant and displeasing. However, they had to admit that Lu Feng's words were true. Plus, they all knew that Lu Feng had the right to be arrogant. As if he was displeased by Lu Feng's words, the figure fell silent. After a long while, he finally spoke again. "The path to the Emperor's Tao is not completely smooth. Since ancient times, many geniuses have looked down on the world and were invincible. However, in the end, didn't they all fall on the final path? Let's not talk about the distant past. Your Lu family's king of life and death suppressed the divine king of chaos for a few hundred years. However, in the end, he was also surpassed by the divine king of chaos, who didn't have any bloodline power. However, he stopped at the final realm. Now, he hasn't even stepped foot into the otherworldly supremacy. Therefore, talent only means that you have a high starting point. It doesn't mean that you will definitely win in the end." After saying this, the figure finally turned around and walked back to the group of foreign race youths. A faint smile tugged at Lu Feng's lips as he watched the figure leave. At this moment, Lu Ming had already arrived beside Lu Feng. He looked at the departing figure and frowned slightly. "Lu Feng, is that person also a king?" Lu Feng nodded without hesitation. The smile remained on his lips, as if he didn't care about any of this at all. When he saw Lu Feng's attitude, Lu Ming could only sigh deeply. A king. Even in the era of the War of the Kings, he was still one of the most terrifying protagonists. However, in Lu Feng's eyes, a king was nothing more than that. The scene rendered everyone speechless. He's just a peak 7th level King Dao genius. He's even a bit weaker than the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao when I first met him, to say nothing of immortal kings and demon kings. There's nothing to be afraid of. When he heard Lu Feng's words, the corner of Lu Yun's mouth twitched. He'd just arrived at Lu Feng's side. One had to know that because his bloodline had been extracted, he was only a peak 3rd level genius. However, the one Lu Feng spoke of was a peak 7th level King Dao genius. They couldn't even be mentioned in the same breath as him. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng said there was nothing to be afraid of. I really didn't expect that the 31st Prince of the Serene Blood Clan would be the true hidden genius of the Serene Blood Clan. He's the one they rely on. That person just now was the 31st Prince of the Serene Blood Clan? Asked Lu Feng. Lu Ming nodded lightly. The Serene Blood Clan has a total of 37 princes. The most famous among them were the 3rd Prince, the 8th Prince, the 19th Prince, and the 23rd Prince. These 4 princes are all kings of massacre. It can be said that the 4 monstrous princes of the Serene Blood Clan have shaken the universe and made the geniuses of billions of races tremble. Apart from these 4 princes, although the other princes are somewhat famous, they aren't very dazzling existences. The strongest among them is merely an ordinary 4th-level Emperor Dao genius. Of course, legend has it that the 31st Prince is such an existence. Originally, when Wang Zhan appeared, many existences had seen the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao's endless concealment and guessed that the Serene Blood Clan was also hiding such a monstrous genius. They wondered which of the 4 princes it was. Now I finally understand. Lu Ming finally knew the truth. It turned out that the hidden peerless prince of the Serene Blood Clan wasn't one of the 4 princes. It was the 31st prince, who wasn't outstanding or mediocre. Suddenly, Lu Ming seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Lu Feng and said solemnly, "Lu Feng, you have to be careful of the 31st prince. Although on the surface, he might not be as good as the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao. However, in a real fight, he might be even more terrifying than the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao." Hearing this, Lu Feng looked at Lu Ming in confusion. "Didn't you not know his identity before? How can you be so sure that the 31st Prince is even more terrifying than the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao?" Lu Ming smiled faintly. "Lu Feng, could it be that you have forgotten his identity?" Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. However, after thinking for a while, he nodded slightly. He had thought it through thoroughly. "I was careless. The Serene Blood Clan, the Serene Blood Clan. Their progenitor is the Overlord of an era. The power of their bloodline must be a kind of supreme power. Once the power of the blood mark is fully unleashed, the power of their power is extremely terrifying. In that case, if he fully unleashes his combat strength, he's even stronger than the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao." Looking at the back of the 31st Prince, Lu Feng shook his head gently. Although the 31st Prince might be a terrifying existence with 3 supreme powers, he was still slightly inferior to Lu Fenglai, who had 2 souls. After all, with 2 souls activated, Lu Feng was definitely comparable to an existence with 6 supreme powers. Now, he had even comprehended a 5th supreme power. The current Lu Feng could even suppress the immortal king of the past. However, his perfect beginner's strength is still a little troublesome. Even if I fully unleash my combat strength, I might not be able to defeat him. Lu Feng was also aware of his own limitations. Although he had so many advantages against the 31st Prince, who was 1 level higher than him, Lu Feng still did not have any confidence in winning. After all, strictly speaking, the levels that they could surpass were actually the same. "Lu Feng, Do you want to clash with him? Lu Ming's expression changed slightly when he heard Lu Feng's muttering. Without any misgivings, he started to ask Lu Fenglai directly. Lu Feng shrugged his shoulders gently. Whether we fight or not is not something we can decide. After all, no one knows what will happen in the process. Lu Ming followed Lu Feng's gaze and glanced into the distance. He discovered that many of the younger members of the Serene Blood tribe had already entered the entrance. Among those 8 people was the 31st prince. Alright, let's go in too. Although I might not be able to defeat him, once I reveal all my trump cards, I won't be afraid of him. After all, we both have enough trump cards. Lu Feng was wearing a protective armor made of secret treasures. He believed that besides him, the 31st prince definitely had a secret treasure as well. Furthermore, the 31st prince definitely had more secret treasures than he did. Therefore, without any restrictions, the two of them would not be able to kill each other even if they used everything they had. Of course, once the power of these secret treasures was exhausted, the situation would be uncertain. After all, there was a limit to the power of secret treasures. Furthermore, although there was no limit to the level of secret treasures, the power of these secret treasures was definitely limited. In an instant, Lu Feng had already arrived in front of the entrance. At this moment, a few terrifying existences from the human race were standing beside them. With a single glance, Lu Feng saw the person in the center. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng bowed. Greetings, Spirit King. Greetings, seniors of the human race. The human race attached great importance to the great wilderness totem's recognition this time. Not only had the strongest king of the human race, the Life King, personally come, but even a few supreme almighties had appeared. After all, a lineup like this was enough to start a war between races. The Spirit King and the supreme almighties of the human race did not say anything. They only stared at Lu Feng quietly. After a long while, one of the supreme almighties smiled and said slowly, "A taboo monarch. I never thought that the human race would actually give birth to a second taboo monarch. The Lu family is truly heaven-defying. A family with 2 taboo monarchs is truly terrifying. In the history of the human race, the first divine king was an existence akin to the progenitor of the human race. However, he was only a monstrous genius at the peak of the 7th order monarch realm. He was still quite a distance away from becoming a taboo monarch. In the entire history of the human race, only the human king was a true taboo monarch. His taboo monarch was even more terrifying and lawless. This was because the human king had used his own power to raise his title to the taboo monarch. Compared to the 5 taboo monarchs that had been passed down since ancient times, the human king's title was clearly even more terrifying. Lu Feng could clearly sense that the Almighty who was talking to him was not a venerable martialist. He was a psychic master, so he should be in existence at the level of a Void Emperor. He might even be an extremely terrifying Void Emperor from ancient times. Chapter 481. In the human race, the Void Emperor basically appeared in one place, the Federal University. In that case, this Void Emperor was most likely an existence that had walked out of that place. Lu Feng smiled gently. Teacher, you're too kind, thank you for your praise. As for me, I won't deny it because I have the strength and qualifications to be recognized. This was Lu Feng's arrogance. This was Lu Feng's confidence. Even when facing those terrifying experts, his glory and confidence would not wither at all. Hearing how Lu Feng addressed him, the Void Emperor was slightly taken aback. However, he soon smiled gently. His elegant figure was no longer concealed. Yes, you're still a student of our Federal University. Dao Songtian contacted me a while ago and asked me to ask you when you can go back. You should know that you've missed almost a year of classes. Lu Feng shrugged helplessly. Perhaps only he could be so impudent in front of these terrifying existences. You really can't blame me for this. However, after this is over, I should be able to return to the human race. At that time, I will report to the university. Hearing this, the Void Emperor laughed and patted Lu Feng's shoulder gently. Previously, when Dao Songtian wanted to mobilize all the forces of the Federal University to search for Lu Feng, the Void Emperor did not think much of it. After all, although Lu Feng's talent actualization quotient was as high as 2.4, he had the potential to become a God Emperor. However, this was still potential. It was very difficult for him to succeed. However, after the battle between Lu Feng and the Demon King, he was completely recognized as the Taboo King. All the doubts in his mind disappeared. He already knew that Lu Feng had such potential because he was an emperor. Now that he heard that Lu Feng wanted to report to the Federal University, the Great Void Emperor naturally felt happy from the bottom of his heart. It's good that you remember. After saying this, the Void Emperor did not say anything else. The Spirit King had finally arrived before Lu Feng. The Spirit King was an extremely handsome young man. If it wasn't for the constant confident smile on his face. If that was the case, the Spirit King's existence would really be like the boy next door. However, this boy next door existence was fully deserving of being at the pinnacle of the universe. The Outer Realm battlefield had ancient restrictions. It was extremely troublesome for supreme beings to enter. The same was true for the otherworldly supremes. Generally speaking, the most powerful otherworldly supremes were the life and death quasi-kings. This was also the reason why when Pil Saint Rong appeared back then, all the outsiders had fallen silent. After all, if a heretic supreme were to descend onto the battlefield in the Outer Realms, then they would be completely invincible and impossible to deal with. Apart from the Medicine God territory, the other lords of the 36 territories were all close to the quasi-life and death quasi-monarch. They were all peerless almighties or truly invincible almighties. Among them, the most famous were Yao Guangming and a few other invincible lords. Apart from them, there were also a few independent cultivators who were similarly invincible almighties. Apart from these original inhabitants of the Outer Realm battlefield, there were even more terrifying almighties among the existences sent by the various major races to the Outer Realm battlefield. Among them, there were even almighties who defied the heavens. In general, there were no less than 20 almighties who were publicly known in the Outer Realm battlefield. Among these 20 almighties there were 5. The most famous ones were the 5 Supremes. They were the ancestor of the Serene Blood Clan, the immeasurable king of the Sky Demon Clan, the Spirit King of the Human Clan, King Bai Zhao Lu of the Emperor Clan, and the Divine King of the Wind God Territory, Yao Guangming, who had been in the limelight recently. These 5 were all quasi-life and death quasi-kings. They were terrifying existences that even the Divine King couldn't kill once they decided to escape. It could be said that in their generation, there was no danger to speak of in the current world. Among these 5, the Spirit King of the Human Clan and King Bai Zhao Lu of the Emperor Clan were undoubtedly the most powerful existences. Their fates were also the most resounding. Before Alchemy Saint Lu had appeared, these two were publicly acknowledged as kings of kings in the Outer Realm battlefield. It was a pity that Lu Feng had never imagined that one of the 2 legendary kings would actually be like this. The Spirit King gently smiled when he saw the strange expression on Lu Feng's face. At that moment, Lu Feng felt like his heart had been moved as well. Such a scene made him tremble in fear. It had to be mentioned that the Spirit King had directly affected his heart. Lu Feng knew that although he wasn't very powerful, his heart was incomparably firm. But now, the Spirit King's casual smile had directly affected his heart. This was just too terrifying. A moment later, Lu Feng's expression returned to normal. However, a strange expression appeared in the Spirit King's eyes when he saw this. In a moment after the Serene Blood Clan has entered, it will be your turn. According to the information we've received, The first trial should be a test of desolation. As long as your talent is enough, you can definitely pass it. This shouldn't be a problem for the 10 of you. Hearing this, a trace of excitement appeared on the faces of the 9 people aside from Lu Feng. Being able to pass the first trial would bring countless benefits. This was something that everyone knew. They all knew. When they saw Lu Feng, they understood that their only purpose here was to work hard and increase their strength. Everything else was destined to have nothing to do with them. Glancing at these people, the Spirit King's voice rang out once more. The second trial. It's also a test of talent, but this trial is much more difficult. This trial will be conducted based on the number of people. According to my calculations, if you want to pass the second trial, you need to be at least an emperor of your clan. Of the 10 people present, only Yuyo Qijian and Lu Feng of the Yuyo clan were emperors or above. In other words, out of the 10 of them, 8 would be eliminated. Many existences were slightly speechless. One of the supreme experts beside the Spirit King sighed helplessly when he saw this. He had no choice but to gather these people. This was because many of the human race's monstrous geniuses could not be contacted. Many of the monstrous geniuses that could be contacted, such as the 7 emperors of the younger generation, were at least demigods. They were unable to enter this place. It was because of this that these people were chosen in the end. However, it was clear that these people were a little lacking. However, when they saw how indifferent Lu Feng was before them, a different expression appeared in their eyes. They knew that if Lu Feng did not come, the human race would really be humiliated. However, if Lu Feng came, the result would be different. This was because Lu Feng's existence was unparalleled. He alone could take on 10,000 people. Of course, if your willpower is strong enough, if a miracle happens, it might not be impossible for you to pass with your strength at the 3rd rank. This will depend on yourselves. The Spirit King did not say anything after that. The person who spoke was a supreme expert of the human race. He didn't say anything useless. He only warned Lu Feng and the others that they had to focus on their own safety. If something was wrong, they had to quickly come out. If you encounter existences from other clans, you have to be careful. If you can't beat them, don't try to be brave. Although you all have artifacts protecting you, once the opponent's power surpasses a certain limit, these artifacts will lose their effects. As a result, don't be too conceited. Do you understand? The 10 of them nodded gently at the same time. Alright, let's go. I hope you can succeed. The location of the teleportation was a crack. It was the only crack on the totem of the Great Wasteland. Of course, this crack wasn't forcefully opened by many existences. After all, the totem of the Great Wasteland was a terrifying existence that was comparable to the most powerful overlords of time. Even the number 1 existence in the world, Dishi Divine King, might not be able to harm it, let alone these people. This crack was located at the center of the lower part of the Great Desolation Totem. Its appearance was completely natural. Of course, it was also because of this crack that many existences were finally certain that the Great Wilderness Totem was about to recognize a master. After all, the appearance of this crack represented the meaning behind it. The appearance of the human team could be said to be the true focus of attention. This was because Lu Feng's arrival was no longer a secret. Many of these existences had seen the scene of Lu Feng's peak battle with the Devil King. Therefore, even though Lu Feng was still under the protection of his fate chart cultivation technique, he was still recognized by many existences. Although Lu Feng was no longer the only strongest person in Wangzhan, he was still recognized as the taboo monarch. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, the monstrous genius of the epoch was already an invincible title. However, compared to the taboo monarch, that was just a joke. Therefore, Lu Feng's title of taboo monarch could be said to be peerless in the current era. His arrival naturally attracted almost everyone's attention. When these people saw Lu Feng and the 9 monstrous geniuses of the human race walk directly into the great wilderness totem, a strange expression appeared on their faces. I wonder if he can succeed this time. After all, this is a terrifying artifact comparable to a peak overlord. Perhaps he can't use it now. However, once he grows to the level of the Divine King, no one in the current era will be able to contend with him with this artifact. A mere grade 10 Emperor Dao artifact was enough to more than double the power of the Divine King. If a taboo monarch like Lu Feng wielded a grade 11 artifact that surpassed grade 10 artifacts, who in the current era would be able to contend with him? Many existences were horrified and completely speechless. Walking quietly on the path in the void, Lu Feng was different from the astonished geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the human race. He was incomparably calm, as if nothing in front of him could shake him in the slightest. The moment they entered, they arrived in an area filled with galaxies. This strange phenomenon made the geniuses and monstrous geniuses tremble slightly. These people had a certain fear of the unknown. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng didn't seem to care at all. This was because he'd already experienced far too many of these scenes. With a single glance, Lu Feng completely understood. He understood that there was an inner world within the great wilderness totem. Lu Feng, according to the rumors, a test should appear soon after we enter. Why hasn't it appeared yet? He was slightly puzzled. Although Lu Feng was the youngest here, everyone revolved around Lu Feng. Even Yu Yochi, who feared and loathed Lu Feng to the core, felt the same way. This was because Lu Feng's strength was publicly acknowledged to be unparalleled here. Lu Feng stopped in his tracks when he heard Lu Yun's words, a strange look on his face. Chapter 482. After sensing for a moment, an inexplicable smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Looking ahead, Lu Feng's voice slowly spread out. If you don't want to die, get rid of all of this. Lu Feng's voice was very calm. There wasn't much coldness in his voice, but it was filled with an unparalleled killing intent in the ears of many people. It was as if Lu Feng's massacre would descend at any time, causing the world to tremble. The geniuses of the human race looked at each other, seeing the confusion and doubt in each other's eyes. However, they didn't ask anything, because they knew that Lu Feng wouldn't say these things for no reason. Time passed by minute. In the blink of an eye, 10 minutes had passed. Finally, it seemed like he was getting impatient. A trace of coldness finally appeared on Lu Feng's calm face. Since you want to die, then don't blame me. The moment his voice fell, everyone felt as if a hazy sky had appeared in the void. The sky was incomparably gloomy, as if it was a miniature version of the netherworld. In an instant, the unparalleled heavens covered them, completely enveloping them within. Green sky, they had heard about it for a long time and seen many images. They had seen this terrifying supreme immortal technique. However, this was the first time they experienced it personally. The faces of the 9 geniuses changed drastically, and among them, Yu Yuqi's face turned pale. He thought that Lu Feng was about to make a move. However, the pale expression quickly disappeared, because he knew that he was overthinking. If Lu Feng wanted to deal with him, he would have done it long ago. Why would he wait until now? Finally, the terrifying green firmament sky slowly descended. At this moment, all the geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the human race were completely silent. When they looked at Lu Feng, their expressions were filled with inexplicable shock. These people had only heard of the terror of the green sky before, but this was the first time they felt it for themselves. To them, the Qingming sky was too terrifying. It was unimaginably terrifying. Under the green netherworld sky, they felt as if the apocalypse of the universe had arrived. It was a kind of extreme annihilation from the soul to the body. With this kind of power, even an ordinary demigod would turn into ashes in an instant. Lu Ming's expression was unusually heavy. At this moment, he finally understood that Lu Feng was not joking when he said that he could kill 1,000 by himself. Lu Feng possessed such strength just by relying on the sky of green eminence. Finally, when many existences thought that doomsday was about to descend, the cyan underworld sky descended. In an instant, the entire void trembled and countless ripples appeared. In the next moment, it was as if countless spaces were about to collapse. The expressions of the 9 Supremes changed drastically. In this strange space-time, in the internal space of the totem of the great wilderness, they had to be extremely cautious even when moving. How could they dare to display such a terrifying power as Lu Feng did? In the next moment the void really did shatter. This was the precursor to the shattering of the entire space-time. These people's faces turned ghastly pale. They seemed to be able to see the scene of the space-time collapsing and them being buried along with it. However, just as this situation was about to happen, Lu Ming finally noticed something strange. The space-time in front of them was indeed collapsing. However, beyond the collapsing space-time, there was still a void. It was actually a void world that was exactly the same as this place. Soon, all the surrounding spaces completely collapsed. At this moment, a scene that made them fall silent finally appeared. All the spaces collapsed, but there was another space that was exactly the same as this one. At this moment, the 9 of them understood. Lu Ming's voice slowly sounded. The Serene Blood Tribe has a powerful bloodline branch, also known as the Divine King Clan. This bloodline is the Illusory Tribe. Rumor has it that the descendants of the Illusory Tribe will be able to obtain the special ability of their ancestor, the Illusory Divine King, illusory space once they condense the blood mark. Within this space, there is a world that is similar to the outside world. However, within this space, it is controlled by the Master. They can create an illusory world according to their own wishes. In this illusory world, if one is careless and dies, one will truly die. Although everything created in the illusory world is fake, it is the soul that experiences everything. If the soul is annihilated, even if the physical body is in perfect condition, it will be completely useless. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded slightly. His eyes were still cold. The surrounding geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the human race had extremely ugly expressions. They already understood that from the moment they had entered this place until now, they had not moved an inch. All of these changes were because they had entered an environment of souls. It could be said that if Lu Feng had not destroyed everything with extreme violence, they would have sunk into this illusory world forever, tormented by those tribulations and ultimately destroyed. Lu Feng's eyes were still scanning the area. The 9 of them knew that after suffering such a great loss, how could Lu Feng let it go? He was already angry. Finally, when Lu Feng scanned a third of the surroundings, he stopped. At this moment, the corners of his mouth curled into a mocking smile. You die in an instant. Lu Feng had disappeared from where he had been standing. His speed had already exceeded the limits of their vision. Even their consciousness had not been able to discover how Lu Feng had disappeared. When these people found out where Lu Feng was, it was not them who had discovered it. It was only after they felt an extremely strong collision that they realized that Lu Feng had already gone to a place 100 miles away in the blink of an eye. 100 miles away, Lu Feng stood quietly in the void. Beside him, the figure of an existence swayed and finally fell into the void. However, there was a hint of mockery on that evil face. Emperor Lu Feng, that's all there is to it. Do you think you can kill me? A moment later, he staggered to his feet and stood up. When they saw this person, the 9 geniuses and monsters of the human race had a hint of anger in their eyes. Finally, Yu Chi heard the angry voice, Illusory Ali, what are you doing? With a glance, Yu Chi recognized this person's identity. He was one of the 8 monsters of the Serene Blood Clan who had entered the Great Wilderness Totem. Illusory Ollie was an abnormally famous monstrous genius. It was said that he was one of the peak monstrous geniuses of the Nether blood race. Although he couldn't compare to the four princes, the Emperor of Slaughter, he was at the peak of the Fourth Order Emperor realm. He was an existence that was infinitely close to the Emperor of Slaughter. In the past, Yu Chi had only heard of his existence, and had only seen his appearance. Although Yu Qianqian and Illusory Ollie were both monsters of the same level. But in Yu Chi's heart, if it wasn't for the Great Wilderness Totem's recognition, he and Illusion Ollie would have never met face to face in their entire lives. However, an existence that they'd never have the chance to meet in their entire lives had mercilessly tried to kill them as soon as they'd met. If Lu Yun hadn't discovered this earlier, and if it hadn't been for Lu Feng's peerless strength that shattered all the illusions, they would have sunk into this environment and been completely annihilated. Hearing Yu Chi's words, Illusion Ollie still had a mocking smile. He glanced at Yu Chi and said disdainfully, "A bunch of trash. If it wasn't for the Emperor, you would have thought you were still in the inheritance. Even if I caused a disaster, you would have thought it was part of the trial. In the end, all of you would have died at my hands. I really don't understand. How can people like you have the right to come here?" Indeed, if Lu Yun hadn't discovered them, they would have ended up like Illusion Ollie said. Even if they encountered a disaster, they wouldn't care too much. After all, none of the youths who entered this place died. After saying that, the Illusory Ollie looked at Lu Feng, his expression unchanged. Everyone says that Emperor Lu Feng is unparalleled in the world, the taboo king. In my opinion, that's all there is to it. If it wasn't for his warning, I'm sure you would have been the same. You wouldn't even know how you died. Hearing this, Lu Feng smiled but didn't explain anything. Because this time, Alex was right. He didn't care at first because Lu Feng didn't think that someone would dare to plot against him. Lu Feng looked at the Illusory Ollie, who stood up and was about to leave, and said with a playful tone, "This time, it was indeed my negligence. It seems that my recent victories and breakthroughs have caused me to forget myself. If that's the case, I'll have to thank you this time. However, those words just now, are they your last words? In return for your help, I can allow you to say a little more." Illusory Ollie's body trembled slightly as he turned around. The next moment, he turned around and looked at Lu Feng. His expression was incomparably playful. "My last words? Emperor, I think what you said before was right. Your recent victories have caused you to forget yourself. Do you really think you can kill me?" In the next moment, a sparkling rune suddenly appeared in front of the Illusory Ollie. It floated silently, incomparably serene and beautiful, filled with a peculiar luster. Seeing this rune, Lu Ming and the others' expression turned unsightly. Among the crowd, only Lu Feng's expression remained unchanged. Illusion Ollie looked at Lu Feng and said in an incomparably relaxed manner, "This rune is called Light Protection. It's one of the few secret treasures passed down from my illusion lineage. Its existence can perfectly protect me. Now, you still want to kill me? Ha ha, ha ha." A wanton wild laughter sounded, as if he could already see Lu Feng's helpless expression. Indeed, after seeing the protection of light, the expressions of the few people, including Lu Ming, turned ugly. Illusory Aaron's strength was only at the intermediate perfect stage. Perhaps they weren't his match. However, if Lu Feng were to make a move, facing the intermediate perfect stage Illusion Ollie, he would most likely be crushed. Not to mention anything else, just the descent of Qing Ming Tian would be enough to completely suppress Illusion Ollie. But now, with Light Protection's existence, everything would turn into bubbles. Illusion Lineage's inheritance, secret treasure Light Protection. Legend has it that it's a peak grade 8 secret treasure. I truly didn't expect your Illusion Lineage's primogenitor to think so highly of you and let you bring it out. Could it be that they're not afraid that you'll be killed by some exceptional almighty and snatched away? One must know that this item is something that even exceptional Almighty would be moved by. Chapter 483. Lu Feng's voice slowly echoed. After staying with Jiahuoyue for such a long time, he knew a lot of famous secret treasures in the universe. Among them, the Guardian of Light was one of them. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the illusory Alex's face turned ugly. This time, he was able to obtain the Guardian of Light because the ancestors of his family thought highly of him. Previously, the elders of his family had warned him many times not to reveal the fact that he had the Guardian of Light. Otherwise, it might cause some terrifying unforeseen event. This time, the illusory Alex didn't want to expose himself. Unfortunately, he was facing Emperor Lu Feng. Although he kept saying that he disdained Lu Feng, he still felt fear in his heart when facing Lu Feng. He was a mid-level perfect stage martialist, and Lu Feng was only at the peak evolution stage. There were 2 levels between the two of them. However, he knew very well that if he didn't have the Guardian of Light, he would be killed instantly if he faced Lu Feng. The Emperor's name, the taboo monarch's existence, this wasn't something that could be casually said. The illusory Alex couldn't help but reveal that he had the Guardian of Light. Now that he heard Lu Feng mention it, he naturally felt uncomfortable. He raised his head and looked at Lu Feng with a cold gaze. The illusory Alex slowly said, "You don't have to worry about this. Emperor Lu Feng, I hope that you can continue to have such luck in the future and be able to live a smooth life forever." After saying that, the illusory Alex turned around again and flew forward. Unfortunately, he did not manage to fly more than 10 meters because Lu Feng reappeared in front of him in the next moment. Looking at the illusory Alex with an ugly expression, Lu Feng smiled gently. "The time for your last words has ended." Hearing this, the illusory Alex was slightly stunned. However, he soon laughed wantonly. I didn't hear wrongly, right? How dare you try to kill me after knowing that I have the Guardian of Light? I really didn't expect Emperor Lu Feng to be such an idiot. He's a big idiot who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth." Unbridled laughter could be heard continuously. Behind Lu Feng, those geniuses were also looking at Lu Feng strangely. They also didn't understand why Lu Feng would say such words after knowing that the illusory Alex possessed a peak grade 8 secret treasure. Lu Feng stood quietly on the spot with an indifferent smile on his face. It seemed as though the person Alex had mocked wasn't him, Lu Feng. Looking at the wildly laughing figure, Lu Feng slowly opened his mouth and said, "My attack just now should have seriously injured you." Lu Feng's words caused the crazy laughter to abruptly stop. At this moment, the illusory Ali's face was distorted, an indescribable distortion. Looking at this scene, everyone looked at everything in front of them in astonishment. Lu Feng smiled lightly and continued, "Indeed, secret treasures don't need to be of a high enough level to be used. However, the amount of power that can be used is limited. The Guardian of Light is a peak grade 8 secret treasure. The more terrifying a secret treasure is, the more power it needs to be used every time. You're just a monstrous level 4 Emperor Dao genius, your cultivation has only reached the peak of mid-level. How many times can you use the Guardian of Light? Once? Or is it that you can't use that perfect defense at all? Otherwise, why would you be injured just now?" At this moment, the eyes of the many existences lit up. They looked at the illusory Ali with a strange expression. Apart from Lu Feng, everyone else had secret treasures. They naturally knew that although secret treasures didn't need to be of a high enough level to be used, if they wanted to use it, they needed to use their own power. The more powerful a secret treasure was, the more power it needed to use it. Just as Lu Feng said, if the illusory Alex had been injured by Lu Feng's attack, then he probably wouldn't have been able to use the Guardian of Light anymore. Otherwise, how could he have been injured? The power of my green firmament is equivalent to a peak demigod, which is a powerful attack from a level 4 demigod domain demigod. Your power limit is only comparable to a level 2 demigod. Therefore, having you resist a level 4 demigod's power of power is enough to injure you greatly. If it wasn't for the Guardian of Light, I'm afraid you would have been destroyed countless times by my green firmament. Fortunately, you managed to use it in time. Therefore, you didn't die, and you even managed to survive perfectly. However, my next attack is something you won't be able to withstand. Although I didn't use my strongest trump cards in that attack, I still used a terrifying amount of power to kill. That kind of attack wouldn't be much weaker than Qing Mingtian's attack. As for you, although you managed to withstand my second attack, you also suffered a certain amount of damage. In order to cover up everything, you even took the initiative to reveal that you have the Guardian of Light. You hoped that I would misunderstand and think that it was impossible to break through your defense. That way you would be safe. I don't know if I'm right. Silence. The illusory Alex was completely silent. However, when he looked at Lu Feng, his eyes were filled with viciousness. Emperor, the human race isn't the only one outside. My illusory supreme ancestor is also in the outer region. He is also around the great wilderness totem. If you don't want to cause any conflict, it's best that you let me go. Without a doubt, he admitted to everything that Lu Feng had said. In an instant, the 9 people from the human race were filled with a strange feeling. They had never imagined that everything would develop into such a scene. Looking at the illusory Alex, Lu Feng smiled gently and shook his head slowly. Is your supreme ancestor from the illusory lineage very strong? He was merely an existence at the level of a peerless almighty. This kind of strength is really nothing in the human race's team this time. Lu Feng's words made the illusory Alex's heart sink. Furthermore, Lu Feng didn't finish his sentence. At this moment, he looked at the illusory Alex again. However, there was a trace of pity in Lu Feng's eyes. I, Emperor Lu Feng, have never given up because of threats. The moment his voice fell, an ancient illusory figure appeared behind Lu Feng. It was a terrifying supreme monarch. He walked out of the tranquil long river of time and covered history. He was filled with an unparalleled majesty and a tyrannical bearing. That's the ancestor of the Lu family, the human monarch. Lu Feng had executed a supreme killing move. Although Lu Feng hadn't reached the pinnacle, with the addition of his bloodline, the great demon, and the primordial power, his combat strength had reached a terrifying level. He was even able to kill a peak 4th level demigod. Naturally, even though the illusory Ali tried his best to activate the power of the light protection, he was still annihilated in the end. Lu Feng walked up to the illusory Ali and looked at the sparkling and translucent runes. A trace of resplendent divine light flashed in Lu Feng's eyes. The light protection was a pinnacle grade 8 secret treasure. It was 1 grade higher than Lu Feng's armor. It could be said that this pinnacle grade 8 secret treasure was a shocking treasure in the entire universe. In terms of value, it was almost comparable to a grade 9 divine item. This item is not bad. It's a pity that it followed the wrong person. He smiled faintly and held the light protection in his hands. However, in the next moment, Lu Feng felt an invincible and terrifying intent emerge from the light protection. In an instant, Lu Feng's eyes were slightly dazed. He seemed to have fallen into a different space and time. Lu Ming's group of 9 looked at Lu Feng's bewildered expression with a strange look. 10 minutes passed. 20 minutes passed. Lu Feng was still the same as before. Finally, someone stopped waiting and slowly walked up to Lu Feng. However, just as they were about to do something to Lu Feng, the dazed eyes suddenly disappeared. What reappeared was the indifferent gaze from before. When he saw Lu Feng's appearance, Lu Ming sighed softly and asked directly, "Lu Feng, what happened just now? Are you okay?" When he heard this, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. However, they returned to normal after a moment. He shook his head gently. "Something went wrong just now." "It's nothing." These people could see that Lu Feng was unwilling to say anything. Naturally, they wouldn't pursue the matter. They just nodded gently and fell silent. Lu Feng looked at the dimmed radiant guardian in his hands and a smile appeared on his face. This time, you're mine. These people didn't know what kind of thrilling change Lu Feng had experienced in the past 20 minutes. It could be said that Lu Feng had experienced the most terrifying disaster of his life in these 20 minutes. If it hadn't been for the terrifying and mysterious divine Futu in his consciousness space at the last moment, he would have been completely annihilated. In a mysterious and illusory world, an existence with closed eyes suddenly opened his bewitching eyes. This was an incomparably mysterious existence. In this mysterious and abnormal world, he was the greatest ruler. However, in the next instant, the moment those strange eyes opened, a faint purple trace overflowed from the corner of his mouth. This was blood. It was the color of the blood of the serene blood tribe. Slowly, he stood up from his unmoving position. He extended his sparkling arm and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. A trace of anger appeared in those mysterious eyes. Who on earth? He actually erased all the spiritual imprints that I had left on the Light Guardian. Not a single trace of it was left. Could it be that the Divine King made a move? Illusory Ali's death was entirely his own doing. This time, Lu Feng had never thought of going on a killing spree. He only wanted to increase his own strength. Unfortunately, his intentions were good, but others weren't willing to let him have his way. Illusory Alex was the first one. In front of him was a path filled with pressure. This was the first trial. As long as he could pass this path, he would have passed the first trial. Chapter 484. According to the people who came here before, as long as one was a peak rank 3 genius, they would be able to pass through easily. Therefore, although they could feel the pressure along the way, they were able to withstand it. This was a test of desolation. It wasn't that terrifying, it could be considered a test of one's aptitude. Therefore, as long as one's aptitude met the requirements, they would be able to pass through easily. Lu Yun walked beside Lu Feng, looking at the silent Lu Feng. He smiled faintly and said, "Lu Feng, you have struck it rich this time." Lu Yun was Lu Feng's cousin, but they were the same age. Lu Yun was also 18 years old this year. He was different from Lu Ming. Lu Ming was already 24 years old, so whether it was speaking or doing things, he was filled with the thoughts of an adult. Lu Yun, on the other hand, was different. He acted more like a child. Hearing Lu Yun's words, Lu Feng smiled faintly and slowly nodded. "Luck, this is pure luck. If he wasn't so conceited, I wouldn't have obtained this thing. If it wasn't for the fact that the illusory Alex believed himself to be powerful and had the help of the Guardian of Light, no one would be able to harm him. In that case, he wouldn't have made a move and ended up being seen through by Lu Feng." Lu Yun laughed heartily. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't dare take the Radiant Guardian for themselves after killing Illusory Alex. After all, Illusory Alex was the one who killed Illusory Alex first. So what if he was killed? No one could say anything. However, it was a little dangerous to take the Radiant Guardian for themselves. After all, the Radiant Guardian was an inherited treasure of the Illusion faction. Not to mention its value, just the symbolism it represented was incomparably revered. If it was someone else who had the guts to kill Illusion Ali, they definitely wouldn't have the guts to take the Radiant Guardian for themselves. However, when it was Lu Feng, these people didn't understand, they didn't have to worry about it. Because Lu Feng was the young master, with his status in the Lu family, as long as he didn't commit an act of extermination or betrayal, no one would do anything to him. The Lu family, on the other hand, was much, much more powerful than the Phantom lineage. Ever since the Lu clan produced 2 otherworldly sovereigns, even the peak Overlord clans were extremely wary of the human race and didn't dare to offend them. Thus, even if the illusionary lineage found out about this, they wouldn't be able to get it back. However, I really didn't expect that the illusion lineage would give it to illusion Alexei. The Radiant Guardian is a supreme treasure even among pinnacle overlords. They actually didn't set up any seals or restrictions. Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. Beside him, Lu Yun kept nagging. Hearing this, Lu Feng just smiled and didn't say anything. There was no way the illusory lineage would be so stupid as to not leave behind something as basic as this. Lu Feng's heart trembled as he recalled the dangerous scene he had just experienced. If it wasn't for the ingress futu, the seals and restrictions set up by the illusion lineage's forefathers would have obliterated him long ago. Lu Feng believed that even a true god would be killed in an instant if faced with that kind of power. Alright, the finish line is up ahead. We've reached the end of the road. They could vaguely see the end of the path up ahead. A trace of helplessness appeared on Lu Yun's face. He had come here only to see Lu Feng kill a person. Then, he had to endure a bit of pressure and complete the path. Everything would be over just like that. The process had been a little too simple, so simple that they weren't used to it. I should return to the Lu family after we leave this place. Let's meet again then. Lu Feng spoke slowly to Lu Yun and Lu Ming when they reached the finish line. Upon hearing Lu Feng's words, both of them nodded gently. Lu Feng's return was completely within the two's consideration. In the past, they might have resisted Lu Feng's return, but after spending some time with Lu Feng, especially after seeing how domineering Lu Feng was for the sake of the Lu family's bloodline, the two of them finally felt at ease. Therefore, they were more than happy to welcome Lu Feng's return. After all, with such a strong and domineering young master, everything they'd suffered over the years would no longer happen again. Lu Yun sighed softly as he looked at Lu Feng's departing figure. Stunning talent, invincible willpower, immortal reputation. Lu Feng could be said to be the most dazzling existence in the universe even without the title of young master of the Lu family. I heard from my father that Lu Feng started cultivating from the awakening of his bloodline. It has only been less than 2 years since he became invincible among those below the God-Spirit realm. It's hard to imagine how he did it without the help of the family's resources. In the past, we all complained that if it wasn't for his existence, we would have definitely reached the peak of the younger generation. We wouldn't be much worse than others. But now, it seems that we were too naive. They'd relied on the family's resources and spent 20 years to reach their current level. However, Lu Feng didn't have the help of any resources. He'd relied entirely on himself to climb up from the bottom step by step in less than 2 years. Although he did have the help of the human king's bloodline, as a disciple of the Lu family, Lu Yun and Lu Ming both knew very well that with only the help of the bloodline, one's cultivation speed might be slightly faster. However, without the existence of resources, one's cultivation speed would still be greatly limited. Hearing Lu Ming's words, a strange expression appeared on Lu Yun's face. In the past, they'd vowed solemnly that they wouldn't be weaker than anyone. If it wasn't for Lu Feng and their bloodline being so weak, they would have definitely become the most important figures of their generation. They wouldn't be any worse than Lu Feng. But now, it seemed that they'd been a little too arrogant. Finally, seeing Lu Feng's back disappear, Lu Ming let out a deep sigh. Let's go, let's give it a try. Although we probably won't be able to make it, I still won't be satisfied if I don't try. Hearing this, the human geniuses beside him nodded lightly and smiled in agreement. Lu Yun sighed almost imperceptibly when he saw this. These people's attitudes made him finally understand the importance of strength. Perhaps a person's background was important, but this was only important to ordinary people. To true nobles, the most important thing wasn't your background, but your ability. In the past, he'd defended the human king Lu family's direct bloodline, but he'd still been mocked and ridiculed by these people. It was only after Lu Feng's arrival that these people trembled in fear with his terrifying, domineering, and powerful aura that they finally changed their attitude. After Lu Feng's departure, the two of them had become the targets of other people's fawning. Soon, the 8 of them walked into the testing tunnel. Yu Qishan's expression shifted as he watched them leave. Before Lu Feng's arrival, he'd been the absolute center of attention. He'd always been the one who'd been surrounded and treated with respect. But with Lu Feng's appearance and Lu Feng's domineering dominance, Yu Qishan's status as a direct opponent of Lu Feng's had plummeted immeasurably. Now, no one was even willing to pay attention to him. Looking at their disappearing figures, Yu Qishan finally scolded them a few times and stepped into the test tunnel. Of course, he was only scolding those people. As for Lu Feng, he only dared to say a few words in his heart. If he were to scold Lu Feng in real life, he would never dare to do so. The second test was actually very simple. Just like the first test, one had to pass through a path. But the path that each person had to take was different. Depending on the realm, the path they had to take was also different. There were a total of 12 paths before the fork. They corresponded to the evolution stage, the upheaval stage, and the perfection stage. There were a total of 12 minor levels, namely the elementary stage, intermediate stage, advanced stage, and peak stage. The path that Lu Feng had chosen was the pinnacle upheaval stage's path. The path was completely forked. Once one entered, the profound mysteries of space would appear and directly take them to different areas. Walking quietly on the path, Lu Feng's heart was calm. He was fully aware of the existence of the second test, because someone had already been here before. Lu Feng silently calculated the time. Finally, when the 10th minute had passed, Lu Feng stopped. At this moment, a figure appeared on the road. Seeing this figure, Lu Feng revealed a faint smile. Just in time, after saying this, Lu Feng raised his foot again. But this time, when he landed, he had already disappeared. The next time he appeared, he was already behind the figure. Just like this, he passed through the figure. Lu Feng didn't look back and continued walking forward. After Lu Feng took a few steps forward, the illusory figure behind him shattered like a crystal that had received a heavy blow. The second test required a monstrous genius at the 4th level of the sovereign Tao domain to pass. That was because in the second stage, an illusory figure would appear. He was a test and would stand in the way. Anyone who wanted to pass this stage would have to kill him. The level and strength of this shadow was just about 4 levels higher than the challenger's level and strength. In other words, a 3rd-rank expert couldn't defeat him, but a 4th-rank expert could completely crush him. Such a design would completely eliminate those existences below level 3. Soon, Lu Feng had walked the entire path and arrived at the end of the path. In front of him was a circular teleportation gate. Lu Feng knew that this should be the final exit. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng stepped into it. In an instant, he felt as if the world had changed. However, a moment later, this feeling disappeared completely. Lu Feng appeared under another starry sky. At this moment, a strange expression appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. He could feel that what he had felt just now was indeed the feeling of time and space being changed. In other words, when he had just passed through the circular gate, he had once again entered another space-time. There was no doubt that there was more than one inner world within the Great Desolation Totem Array. Chapter 485. Standing in the void, Lu Feng scanned his surroundings and took in everything in front of him. This was a boundless void world. However, this void world wasn't as monotonous as it seemed. This was because there was a terrifyingly huge crystal pillar of light in this void world. It exuded an ancient and desolate aura as it stood quietly in the void. Beside it, there was a similar circular door. Its shape was almost exactly the same as the door that Lu Feng had passed through when he entered this place. However, it was obvious that this portal was dozens of times larger than the previous ones. In addition to these two things, there were more than 10 existences standing quietly around the light pillar. Lu Feng didn't take a closer look because these people were quite far away from each other. After all, in such an environment, many existences had to be on guard against each other. Lu Feng didn't know the identities of these people at first. However, Lu Feng only glanced at the people in front of him and immediately understood. These people should be the geniuses of the peak overlords who had entered earlier. However, for some reason, they were waiting quietly here. When these people sensed Lu Feng's arrival, they all cast their gazes over. When he saw that Lu Feng was from the human race, he had a strange look in his eyes. It turns out that the human race has already entered. I think it won't be long before everyone is here. This time, it just so happens that everyone is here. Lu Feng was slightly confused, but he didn't ask anything. The existences here were all from different races and didn't have any friendly relations with him. Therefore, Lu Feng would rather observe on his own than ask anything. However, just as Lu Feng was about to approach the huge light pillar, he suddenly heard a voice. Lu Feng? Hearing this, Lu Feng stopped in his tracks and looked at the source of the voice. With a glance, Lu Feng revealed a faint smile. I didn't expect you to be here too. Lu Feng knew the person who spoke. He was the first person Lu Feng knew among the different races. This person was Guang Ran Tianxing from the War God race. As the current young master of the War God race, Guang Ran Tianxing's name could be said to be very famous. Before the start of the Battle of the Kings, he was already one of the strongest demon-level geniuses. Back then, before Lu Feng obtained the title of Massacre Emperor, Guangran Tianxing was already the Massacre Emperor. His strength was universally acknowledged. After sensing Guang Ran Tianxing's power fluctuations, Lu Feng nodded gently. He could clearly sense that Guang Ran Tianxing had definitely reached the perfect stage. Furthermore, he was at the middle stage of the perfect stage. Guang Ran Tianxing was already at the peak of the upheaval transformation stage back then. When he had obtained the title of Massacre Emperor, he had been at the peak of the upheaval transformation realm. Now, he had become a perfect stage martialist. Even if he was at the middle stage of the perfect stage, it wouldn't be too much of an exaggeration. After all, he was also of the Divine King's bloodline. Behind him stood a royal family of the War God race. Of course, this wasn't what Lu Feng was most concerned about. What really interested Lu Feng was Guang Ran Tianxing's current aptitude. Back then, he had barely become the Massacre Emperor. In other words, he had been at the edge of the peak Fifth Order Emperor realm. However, Lu Feng could sense that Guang Ran Tianxing seemed to have become stronger. It wasn't that his cultivation was strong, but that he gave off a terrifying burst of power. This undoubtedly meant that Guang Ran Tianxing's aptitude had improved. Legend has it that during the era of the Battle of the Kings, geniuses ran amok. During this era, the origin of the universe sent countless miracles. All the geniuses and evildoers who participated in the Battle of the Kings were blessed with great luck and encountered great opportunities. These fortuitous encounters and luck often improved their aptitude imperceptibly, allowing their strength to improve on a fundamental level. Lu Feng understood that Guang Ran Tianxing should be such an existence. He must have also encountered some fortuitous encounters. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given off such a terrifying feeling. When he heard Lu Feng's words, Guang Ran Tianxing looked at Lu Feng with a rueful expression. When they had first met, Lu Feng hadn't even been a martialist. At the time, he had helped Lu Feng obtain the title of Massacre Son. The second time had been when the young master of the Mu family had made his debut. At that time, Lu Feng's power had made him feel a little terrified. However, when he had thought that his own breakthrough was terrifying enough, he had received news about Lu Feng that was even more terrifying. Lu Feng had become the Taboo King. Guang Ran Tianxing had seen the terrifying battle between Lu Feng and the Demon King through some videos. He had believed that he would have died in an instant in such a confrontation. In other words, he wasn't even a match for Lu Feng now. Back then, he had been an ant in his eyes. Now, he had become an ant in Lu Feng's eyes. All these changes had happened in less than 2 years. This speed left him speechless. After looking at Lu Feng for a moment, Guang Ran Tianxing sighed softly and said, "Lu Feng, every time I see you, you are transforming at a terrifying speed. Now you have even reached such heights. At first, I thought that my speed was fast enough. Perhaps I wouldn't be able to catch up to you, but I could already see your back. However, it is only now that I have discovered that I was overthinking all of this," Guang Ran Tianxing lamented endlessly. Hearing this, Lu Feng only smiled slightly. Others only saw the terrifying extent of his improvement. They didn't see the countless efforts he had put in and the endless pain he had experienced. However, Lu Feng wouldn't say these things out loud. He looked at Guang Ran Tianxing and asked, "Could the third test be related to that light pillar? Why are all of you standing here?" Originally, Lu Feng had planned to explore it himself. However, with Guang Ran Tianxing here, he naturally saved a lot of time. Guang Ran Tianxing didn't hide anything. After all, there was no point in doing so. He told Lu Feng everything. It turned out that the third test was indeed that light pillar. Strictly speaking, the third test was the advancement of the second test. There was a strange space in the light pillar. Every test-taker who entered the light pillar would face an opponent. However, the strength of this opponent was far from what the second test could compare to. In the second test, as long as the opponent was a rank 4 Emperor Dao domain expert, they would be able to pass. However, in the third test, one had to be at least at the level of the Emperor of Massacre. The third test should be the true test of the Great Wilderness Totem. The first 2 tests were of some help. They could strengthen the test-taker's physical body and other aspects. However, those enhancements are basically useless to existences at our level. However, from the third test onwards, the rewards that appear are already quite good for us. Lu Feng revealed a look of interest. He had entered this place not only to complete his family's mission, but also to improve his cultivation. However, the truth of the first 2 tests was just as Guang Ran Tianxing had said. They weren't of much help to Lu Feng's improvement. Therefore, Lu Feng thought that the next few tests would probably be the same. He didn't have any other thoughts. However, after hearing Guang Ran Tianxing's words, Lu Feng was finally a little interested. "Then, what are the rewards?" Guang Ran Tianxing shrugged slightly and said, "I'm not sure what the rewards are exactly. Because until now I haven't entered it. In my Battle God tribe, other than me, no one else who came here should be able to pass. Furthermore, it hasn't been our turn to enter yet. Therefore, I don't know what the rewards are exactly." Hearing this, Lu Feng was slightly puzzled. Guang Ran Tianxing chuckled when he saw Lu Feng's expression. "You must be wondering why I'm saying this since I haven't entered yet." Lu Feng didn't try to be pretentious. He nodded his head gently. "I didn't pass, but someone else did. That person was a terrifying demon from the underworld race. The previous tests didn't improve him much either. However, after walking out of here, I could feel that his power had increased tremendously. At that moment, even I felt that it was difficult to fight against him. You have to know that before entering, he was still slightly weaker than me." Lu Feng nodded his head gently. "In that case, he must have really obtained some shocking benefits from this place. One had to know that the accumulation of any genius or demon was rather terrifying. The amount of resources needed to raise a genius cultivation level by 1 level was enough for dozens or even hundreds of ordinary existences to raise their cultivation level by 1 level. And what a monster needed was even more terrifying to the extreme. Hence, if a demon with at least a 5th-level Emperor Realm expert could raise his cultivation level by a terrifying amount, the benefits would naturally be shocking. By the way, didn't the 31st Prince of the Serene blood race come here previously? Why haven't I seen him? There were also a few demons from the Serene blood race here, but Lu Feng didn't see the 31st Prince. Lu Feng wouldn't believe that he couldn't reach this place. After all, the 31st Prince was a monstrous talent of this era. Once he unleashed his full power, he wouldn't be inferior to a heavenly king. He might even be stronger. Guang Ran Tianxing's expression changed slightly when he heard Lu Feng's words. You saw him too, right? Lu Feng nodded gently. He is a monstrous talent of this era. He is a young paragon who will definitely be conferred the title of king. His strength is rather terrifying. Why haven't I seen him? Among the many existences here, Lu Feng was most concerned about the 31st Prince. Besides him, Lu Feng hadn't seen anyone else who was qualified to fight him. Guang Ran Tianxing was silent for a moment before he pointed at the flickering white light pillar and said in a strange tone, "He is inside now." Lu Feng was slightly stunned. "Aren't we supposed to go in order? I remember that he didn't come in for long." Guang Ran Tianxing's expression became slightly awkward when he heard Lu Feng's words. Indeed, he also just came here. However, when he came here, a monstrous talents test was completed. Hence, he went in directly. Lu Feng didn't say anything. He understood in an instant. Lu Feng smiled and said in a calm tone, "So that's how it is." Lu Feng's words made the awkwardness on Guang Ran Tianxing's face even more apparent. Chapter 486. Guang Ran Tianxing knew that Lu Feng had already guessed it. Indeed, everyone here had to follow the order. After all, there was only one assessment venue. If one person entered, the others would have to wait. However, there were also unexpected circumstances. For example, the 31st Prince. His true strength was at the perfect beginner level, which was one level lower than Guang Ran Tianxing's. However, Guang Ran Tianxing was only a peak 5th-level genius with the Emperor Path domain. Although he had had a fortuitous encounter, he had unfortunately not broken through and become a 6th-level genius with the Monarch Path domain. The 31st Prince, on the other hand, was a true monstrous genius at the peak of the 7th step of the Sovereign Realm. He even possessed a battle prowess close to 3 supreme powers. Guang Ran Tianxing was completely unable to resist the 31st Prince, and the others present were the same. Therefore, if the 31st Prince requested it, these people would naturally not dare resist. Lu Feng smiled faintly when he saw Guang Ran Tianxing's expression. "You don't have to do this. You have to know that the law of the jungle is the law of the universe. Those who are not as strong as him will naturally have to retreat. This is the privilege of the strong." Lu Feng was the one who felt this the most. In the past, although he had possessed the talent of a monstrous genius, his true strength had been far too low. He had been inferior to many geniuses, let alone those monstrous geniuses of the same level. Therefore, he had only been able to conceal himself back then. Guang Ran Tianxing's expression calmed down slightly when he heard Lu Feng's words. He had only felt a little awkward just now. He naturally understood this logic. I reckon that the 31st Prince will come out very soon. After all, given his strength, he would not waste much time fighting against a 5th-level genius like himself. The fastest person was a 6th-level genius with the Monarch Path domain who belonged to the Origin race. It only took him a few minutes to come out. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. If he was really fighting against someone who was 5 levels above him, it really wouldn't take much time. After all, the 31st Prince was a monster at the peak of the Monarch realm. His limit was the 7th rank. Lu Feng and Guang Ran Tianxing stood where they were, chatting idly while the others waited quietly. These people didn't really hear what Lu Feng said before. After all, Lu Feng and Guang Rantianxing had only communicated using normal voices. The two of them were relatively close to the light pillar, while the others were a few miles away from them. If they didn't deliberately listen in, they wouldn't have been able to hear the conversation between Lu Feng and Guang Rantianxing. This wait lasted for a full 5 hours. 5 hours later, Guang Rantianxing and Lu Feng's expressions changed slightly. At this moment, they were no longer talking about anything. Instead, they focused on the pillar of light. Other than them, many of the monsters who were waiting here had also walked up to the two of them. That was because this was the place closest to the pillar of light. This shouldn't be. The 31st prince of the serene blood race is a peak existence. He should be the 6th monarch of this epoch, the 6th monarch. This kind of test might be very difficult for others, but it shouldn't be a threat to him. The king of massacre from the origin race only took 20 minutes to come out. How can the 31st prince, who is even more terrifying than him, disappear after 5 hours? No, there's definitely a problem. Many geniuses and monsters had already discovered this. Although they didn't like the 31st prince's strength, they had to admit that he was a peerless genius. Therefore, after seeing that the 31st prince still hadn't appeared after 5 hours, these people couldn't sit still. At this moment, nearly 30 monsters had gathered here. Yu Qijian had also entered. Although he was a human like Lu Feng, Yu Qijian clearly didn't want to stand with Lu Feng. After all, the impression that Lu Feng had left on him was too deep. Therefore, at this moment, he would rather gather with the other races than get close to Lu Feng. Close to 30 monster incarnates stood quietly where they were. Although they looked calm, there was a strange emotion in their eyes. They were all paying attention to that terrifying pillar of light. This wait lasted for 3 whole hours. A full 8 hours had passed since the 31st prince had entered. This amount of time was already the longest among all the people who had entered this place. If it hadn't been for the light, they would have thought that the 31st prince had already failed and left this place completely. What's going on? What exactly happened inside? As time passed, many existences finally stopped staying silent and started to speculate. However, Lu Feng still didn't say anything. He just watched quietly and waited. Finally, at the 9th hour, the huge pillar of light dimmed. Seeing this scene, all the discussions stopped in an instant. These people knew that all the mysteries were about to be revealed. Time continued to pass. In the end, the light pillar completely disappeared. This time, many existences focused their attention on the door. If the 31st prince could walk out now, it meant that he had succeeded. If he didn't, it meant that he had failed. Soon, 1 minute passed. 2 minutes passed. However, no figure appeared. Seeing this, the strange look in the eyes of many existences became even more obvious. Impossible. The 31st prince is a monstrous existence of this era. He's the 6th young paragon in the world. It's impossible for him to fail. Guang Rantianxing frowned slightly. He didn't believe that the 31st prince would fail. After all, at least 2 people had passed this test before. Lu Feng didn't say anything. He just stood there quietly. Just as the discussion reached its climax, the corners of his mouth curved into a perfect arc. Guang Rantianxing was slightly stunned when he saw Lu Feng's expression. However, in the next moment, he saw the figure walking slowly in front of the pillar of light. The 31st prince's appearance caused everyone's voices to stop abruptly. In their hearts, the 31st prince was an incomparably domineering existence. Previously, he had used an extremely strong power to directly enter and disrupt the sequence. Therefore, these people didn't want to provoke such an existence. After walking out of the test, the 31st prince didn't go to the teleportation door to enter the next test. Instead, he chose to walk toward the crowd. At this moment, many existences were slightly stunned. Then, they couldn't help but take 2 steps back. The 31st Prince's existence had given them too much pressure. Step by step, he walked back and forth. At this moment, Lu Feng's smile became even more obvious. He could vaguely see the state of the 31st Prince. Finally, the 31st Prince stopped walking. When they saw where he stopped, other than Yu Qian, everyone else revealed a strange look. No one said anything. They just quietly looked at Lu Feng and the 31st Prince. Lu Feng looked at the 31st Prince and smiled. It seems like you've benefited a lot from here. The 31st Prince didn't deny it. He nodded. Before entering this place, he had met Lu Feng. He knew that Lu Feng could roughly sense his strength. Now, his strength was so obvious that Lu Feng could naturally sense it. I really can't believe it. To be able to raise your cultivation by more than half a minor level, what kind of heaven-shaking benefits did you obtain? The 31st Prince was a true monstrous genius of this era. If such an existence wanted to advance, the amount of resources required was thousands or even tens of thousands of times more than ordinary existences of the same level. However, he had completed such a huge leap in just 9 hours. He was almost at the perfect intermediate stage. This kind of improvement was so great that it was a little shocking. The 31st Prince didn't answer Lu Feng's question. He just looked at Lu Feng strangely. After a long time, the 31st Prince slowly said, "You'll know what benefits there are after you enter. I failed before the final stage. I don't know if you'll be able to pass it." Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. He didn't know what the 31st Prince meant. However, after thinking about it, Lu Feng vaguely understood something. Lu Feng nodded and said directly, "You failed, but that doesn't mean I will fail. However, I'm still very interested. After all, to be able to make a monstrous genius of this era fail, it must not be simple." The 31st Prince smiled softly. "It's not simple. You'll know once you enter. I'll be waiting for you here. I hope you won't disappoint me." After saying that, the 31st Prince turned slightly to the side and made way for Lu Feng. Lu Feng took one last long look at the 31st Prince before walking forward. Many geniuses and monstrous geniuses frowned slightly when they saw this. The 31st Prince could enter in advance because he was terrifying and powerful. However, Lu Feng was nothing more than a monstrous genius of the human race in everyone's eyes. What right did he have to enter before them? Just as these people were about to say something, Guanran Tianxing's voice suddenly rang out. The existence of the war god tribe is not allowed to speak carelessly. Guanran Tianxing didn't care about the lives of others. He cared about his own tribe. After all, he knew a lot about Lu Feng. Back in the massacre abyss, there were hundreds of geniuses who had been suppressed and killed by Lu Feng. Previously, when Lu Feng had transformed into Fudu, he had directly killed hundreds of geniuses and monstrous geniuses in the medicine god territory. It could be said that although Lu Feng appeared indifferent and even cultured, in Guanran Tianxing's eyes, he was a true king of massacre. Who wouldn't dare to kill such an existence? The existences of the war god tribe looked at Guanran Tianxing in confusion. They didn't know why this monstrous genius of the royal tribe would say such a thing. One had to know that Guanran Tianxing's reputation in the war god tribe was very high. However, although they were confused, they didn't really dare to disobey. After all, they knew about Guanran Tianxing's overbearing personality. After seeing that the people of the war god tribe were really silent, the 31st Prince smiled and spoke up. "Although I don't really like you guys, we all belong to the same tribe. I can't just watch you guys die. Therefore, if you don't want to die, it's best that you don't speak carelessly and make him angry." If Guanran Tianxing's words were confusing, then the 31st Prince's words were shocking. After all, he had said that he didn't want to die. Chapter 487. In other words, if anyone dared to spout nonsense, they would only end up dead. The 31st prince was an exceptional prodigy of the epic era. He was incomparably terrifying. No one present was his match. Yet, he had said such a thing. This proved that if the human youth had made a move, even he would not have been able to protect these people. This was undoubtedly the most shocking thing. Finally, as they watched Lu Feng's figure gradually disappear, not only the prodigies of the War God race and the Serene Blood race, but even the people from the other races did not say anything. The atmosphere was incomparably silent for a moment, making everyone feel strangely stifled. After a long time, someone seemed to have thought of something and suddenly looked at a figure beside them. This person was Yu Qijian. Young Master Yu, who is that human who just entered? Yu Qijian was considered a rather famous existence in the universe. After all, with his aptitude, once he entered the perfect stage, he would be able to become a new emperor of the human race. Although he was not recognized as the emperor of massacre in the universe, a level 4 prodigy was enough to become an emperor among the major races. Yu Qijian fell silent when he saw everyone's gaze. After a while, he sighed deeply and said slowly, "You should have heard of his name. In the past few months, he has become the most famous existence in the universe." Everyone frowned slightly, but after a moment, they all relaxed. Because they had thought of it. One had to know that there was only one person who could be the most famous human in the universe, and that person was the Emperor. In an instant, countless gasps were heard. Many existences exchanged glances and saw the fear in each other's eyes. At this moment, they were really glad that they did not say anything. Otherwise, they would have been finished. It should be known that because of the battle where Lu Feng suppressed 100 monstrous geniuses, Lu Feng had become a truly terrifying and decisive person in the hearts of many existences. If they offended Lu Feng, then they would die. Most likely, he wouldn't even avenge their own race. Lu Feng also heard the discussions of these people behind him. However, he only smiled at this. Perhaps many people thought of him as another bloodthirsty existence, but Lu Feng knew that his killing was in his nature. He had a clear conscience. Lu Feng walked in front of the light pillar, stretched out his arm, and directly touched the light pillar that has lost its light. At this moment, countless dazzling lights began to appear within the light pillar. For some reason, Lu Feng suddenly had an inexplicable understanding in his heart. He knew that as long as he walked in, he would be able to take the test. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng entered the light pillar. At this moment, the beam of light shone brilliantly. The moment he entered the light pillar, Lu Feng once again felt a slight space-time distortion. Of course, Lu Feng could also guess that he had such a feeling. After all, although this light pillar was huge, it was absolutely impossible for it to be large enough to withstand the battle of a perfect stage martial artist. As he gazed at the endless desolate land before him, Lu Feng had a strange expression on his face. "I never thought that this would actually be a real world." This was a real world. Apart from the endless desolation, this place was no different from the surface of a planet. Lu Feng felt that this place wasn't much different from the outskirts of the Cymbidium. Lu Feng exhaled slightly and muttered to himself, "This feeling is really comfortable." This kind of comfort wasn't physical, but a kind of mental relaxation. The environment here was almost exactly the same as the Cymbidium, which made Lu Feng feel as if he had returned to the carefree past. Just as Lu Feng relaxed, a sharp and imposing aura suddenly came from the void. It appeared in an instant, as if there was a peerless blade that could completely obliterate a person. Lu Feng slowly opened his eyes. Looking at the thing in front of him, he exhaled softly. "Is this the test? Can't the great wilderness totem be a little more thoughtful?" Shaking his head slightly, Lu Feng walked towards the projection. This was a projection, a terrifying existence at the first level of the demigod realm. In the outside world, it would probably be able to kill countless geniuses in an instant. However, in Lu Feng's eyes, it was really nothing. This kind of thing posed no threat to Lu Feng at all. As Lu Feng slowly approached, the projection moved. It seemed as if it had just finished brewing up some kind of shocking massacre, and it finally erupted completely at this moment. A terrifying power bloomed and rushed towards Lu Feng to kill him. Lu Feng didn't stop walking. In the next moment, he raised his arm and punched lightly. For a moment there was complete silence. Everything ceased to exist and the massacre came to an abrupt end. The illusory figure had completely disappeared. Too weak, way too weak. The current Lu Feng could kill a demigod realm existence as if he was killing ants. He didn't need to use much strength at all. Lowering his head, Lu Feng's eyes revealed a strange emotion. It could be said that this was the first true demigod realm existence that Lu Feng had killed. In the past, the demigod realm was an unreachable existence in my heart. At that time, even becoming a martial artist was a dream for me, and I had to look up to it. As for the demigod realm, it wasn't a rank but a belief. However, who would have thought that the current me would have reached such a level? A demigod realm expert. My senior brother Li Tianlai is a second-level demigod realm existence. If that's the case, the current me can already easily kill him. Lu Feng could still vaguely remember the terrifying scene when Li Tianlai had activated the demigod power in the heavenly city. However, just a year had passed and he was already standing at a new height. He was at a level where he could easily kill Li Tianlai. The demigod realm is not far away. Really, it's not far away. Lu Feng gently clenched his fists. There was a resolute look in his eyes. He knew that the demigod realm was not far away from him. The current him had already reached the pinnacle of the psychic realm. As long as he waited for the right opportunity, he would be able to enter the demigod realm of the Origin Sutra. At that time, he would be a true king psychic master. Once he reached the pinnacle, his combat strength would reach the peak of the demigod realm. As he thought about this, Lu Feng's heart started to burn. After all, although the demigod realm was not far away, the feeling it gave him was not so easy to get rid of. Being able to kill a demigod realm expert was definitely something that Lu Fenglai would be very excited about. After a while, his emotions finally calmed down completely. At this moment, a trace of doubt appeared on Lu Feng's face. He had already thought of something. That's not right. Although this shadow has reached the demigod realm of the demigod realm, this kind of strength does not pose any threat to the 31st prince. Lu Feng had only waved his arm lightly to get rid of the shadow. It should be known that Lu Feng had not used much power in this attack. The 31st prince could have easily unleashed a killing blow of this level. If Luo Yunyang had been able to do it so smoothly, there was no reason for him to waste nearly 9 hours. Lu Feng gradually fell silent as he pondered this. However, this did not last long. In the next moment, an inexplicable fluctuation appeared in the void. Lu Feng slowly raised his head and looked at the thing that had appeared in the void. His eyes were filled with shock. This is... The thing in the void shocked Lu Feng. It was really shocking. This was because he had seen that thing before. This was the 3rd time he had seen it. This thing was actually the mysterious altar beneath the realm of time of the ancient Fang clan and the Alchemist Guild. What exactly is going on? Lu Feng fell silent. He was really silent. He looked at this ancient altar and really did not know what to say. Previously, Lu Feng had thought that this altar seemed to be closely related to the era of elixirs and artifacts. However, he now understood that it was not just the era of elixirs and artifacts. Even the era of desolation was closely related to this altar. It seems like what I thought before was all wrong. This altar was refined by the era of elixirs and artifacts. It really does contain a huge secret. Finally, Lu Feng slowly calmed down. Lu Feng knew that this thing definitely had a shocking origin. However, it was a pity that he had no way of knowing this. All he could do was continue to keep these doubts in his heart. He smiled faintly, but there was a faint bitterness in his smile. Up until now, I seem to know a lot of shocking mysteries, but I can't even solve a single one of them. This feeling is really not good. Compared to other people, even compared to the Divine King, Lu Feng knew a lot more mysteries. It was a pity that he had not solved a single one of these mysteries. This feeling of being surrounded by endless puzzles was really uncomfortable. After letting out a long sigh, Lu Feng did what he most often did after experiencing such a situation. He forgot. He temporarily forgot. As he looked at the ancient Fang tribe's altar in front of him, Lu Feng did not move. He was just thinking about the reason for its appearance. After a while, Lu Feng's eyes lit up. He seemed to vaguely recall what the 31st prince had said before entering. Gradually, Lu Feng revealed a look of understanding. I see, when he had come out, the 31st prince had said that he had failed at the last stage. He did not know if Lu Feng could do it. Back then, Lu Feng had been very puzzled about the meaning of those words. However, he finally understood now. Presumably, this stage was referring to the mysterious altar in front of him. 9 hours. He must have wasted 9 hours of his time on this. Otherwise, given the strength of the 31st prince, he could have easily destroyed that kind of threat. He could have easily passed the test. Lu Feng understood that the reason the 31st prince had wasted so much time was definitely because of this altar. If that wasn't the case, he would have been able to pass it in just a few seconds, let alone dozens of minutes. As he thought of this, Lu Feng finally decided to give it a try. A moment later, he walked slowly towards the altar. Chapter 488. It was as though a flight of stairs had appeared in the void. Lu Feng took a few steps forward and slowly approached the altar. As Lu Feng got closer and closer, the appearance of the altar finally appeared in Lu Feng's sight. His eyes grew bigger and bigger. This was because Lu Feng realized that the altar was simply too big. Compared to the altar he saw in the alternate dimension in the giant Futu on Gufang's star, it was more than 100 times larger. Finally, when Lu Fenglai arrived at the foot of the altar, his heart was thoroughly shaken. Really, it's so big, really it was too big, too big. Standing at his feet, Lu Feng finally discovered the difference between this place and the altar in Gufang's star. Although their appearance was very similar, there was a very obvious difference. The number of altars in Gufang's star's heavenly Futu was close to 100,000. However, there were only 9 steps here. This number was indeed very small. But at this moment Lu Feng completely understood. Looks like the test that the 31st prince mentioned should be this. The 9 steps should be the test of the 9 step. As long as one could reach the top, they would be able to reach the top. He should have passed. But I don't understand how those people passed. Even someone as strong as the 31st prince, a demonic genius of this epoch, could not reach the final peak. Lu Feng found it hard to believe. Could the others pass? However, after a short while, Lu Feng understood what was going on. That was because he remembered that although the 31st prince had not passed the final test, he had still managed to walk out of there. In that case, he could be considered to have passed the examination. Lu Feng figured out that this assessment should be specially prepared for those extreme grade geniuses. Sure enough, when Lu Feng stepped onto the altar, something inexplicable suddenly appeared in his mind. All of this was related to the altar and the test. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood everything. So this is really a test. There are 9 steps and 9 tests. The number and strength of each step are different. Once one passes all of them, one will obtain shocking benefit. It's a pity that I don't know what these benefits are. His mind was filled with the contents of the book. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood why this thing had suddenly appeared. It turned out that the existence of this altar was not something that could appear casually. If one wanted to summon this altar, one had to kill all the projections in one strike. This was the only way to truly draw out the appearance of the altar. Thinking of this, the corner of Lu Feng's mouth unconsciously lifted into a smile. This feeling, it's very similar to those hidden quests that appear in games. Lu Feng shook his head slightly and stopped thinking about it. Finally, he took a step forward. In an instant, the space-time changed again. This time, he didn't enter the previous world. Instead, it was a brand new space. Lu Feng did not pay much attention to his surroundings, because this time, all his attention was on the thing in front of him. It was another illusory figure. Compared to the previous projection, this one was slightly stronger. However, it was still in the first layer of the demigod realm. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng arrived in front of the phantom in an instant. With just one blow, the phantom was completely shattered. Everything was done cleanly and neatly. There was no hesitation. After the illusory figure was shattered, the feeling of time and space being shifted appeared once again. At the next moment, Lu Feng reappeared in his previous position. Lu Feng did not hesitate. He lifted his foot and stepped onto the second step. Looking at the 10 projections in front of him, Lu Feng exhaled softly. The 10 projections were all of the same strength. They were no different from the ones he had encountered on the first step. Master is in the first layer of the demigod realm. That's quite impressive. Lu Feng smiled and nodded slightly. In the next moment, he had already moved and appeared beside those illusory figures in an instant. His speed was so fast that it reached its limit. In just an instant, Lu Feng had already unleashed 10 terrifying killing strikes. In the end, the result was still the same. In an instant, the 10 phantoms were completely shattered and completely disappeared. The third step was still in existence with the same strength as the first and second steps, but the number was a whole 10 times more than the first step. There were more than 100 first-layer demigod. This time, Lu Feng didn't hesitate. In an instant, he used the green sky technique of the telekinesis master. In an instant, under the disastrous effect of the supreme immortal technique, green underworld heaven, the 100 figures were completely annihilated. Lu Feng did not waste any time in passing the 3 stages consecutively. However, Lu Feng understood why the 31st prince had wasted so much time. If it weren't for the green firmament sky, I would have wasted a lot of time facing these 100 projections. After all, if I couldn't kill them with one blow, I would have wasted a lot of time facing these projections. Lu Feng shook his head gently. After returning to his original spot, he once again stepped onto the 4th step. Unlike the previous 3 steps, the projection that appeared on the 4th step was different. However, this time, it was a second-layer demigod. Strictly speaking, second-layer demigods were existences that only 6th-layer demigods could deal with. It might have been troublesome for others, but for Lu Feng, it did not affect him in the slightest. Instant kill. It was a complete instant kill. Lu Feng's speed, strength, and knowledge were unstoppable. On the 5th step, 10 6th-layer projections had been instantly killed with 10 punches. On the 6th step, 100 6th-layer projections had been instantly killed by the descent of the green firmament sky. From the moment he had entered this place to the moment he had stepped on the path to the 7th step, Lu Feng had only used less than an hour. This kind of speed was absolutely shocking. He believed that the 31st prince would definitely not be able to compare to him. After all, the 31st prince was only a martial artist. He did not have a terrifying killing intent like the green firmament sky. Finally, Lu Feng stepped onto the 7th step. Sensing the presence of the projection in front of him, Lu Feng exhaled softly. Everything was as he had expected. It's actually a 3rd-layer demigod. This is already comparable to a 7th-layer peak demigod. If I hadn't comprehended the primitive immortal power, the great demonic power, and the emperor power, and if I didn't have so many trump cards, it would have been more troublesome to deal with this third-layer demigod. Logically speaking, Lu Feng was a seventh-layer demigod. He should have been able to deal with third-layer demigod. However, the reality was not so. Relying on those supreme powers, Lu Feng could instantly enter a demigod domain that was 7 levels above him. However, that was the limit. That was because the 8th-layer demigod domain was the demigod domain. That was the true forbidden mythical domain. Lu Feng could only raise his strength to the 3rd-layer demigod domain. However, his strength was still too freakish. Relying on those powers to enter the 3rd-layer demigod domain, he could still challenge those of a higher level. That was because his supreme powers were really too terrifying. In Lu Feng's opinion, 4th-layer demigods were simply no match for him. When he had used the Earth King move and clashed with the Demonic King limit, he had even temporarily entered the demigod domain. Although this was the result of the two of them clashing, the Earth King move was not Lu Feng's strongest trump card. It could be said that if Lu Feng really gave it his all and did not care about anything else, he could really reach the demigod domain. He could really temporarily break the demigod domain's shackles and enter the demigod domain with his weak mortal body. Therefore, in Lu Feng's opinion, although this 7th-layer demigod domain projection was very terrifying, it was far from terrifying enough to make him feel afraid. However, although this was what he thought, Lu Feng's eyes still showed a hint of seriousness. At that moment, the power of his bloodline surged, allowing Lu Feng to enter the 2nd-layer demigod domain. In an instant, Lu Feng's body was filled with a dense aura of death. The 5th supreme power, the power of death, was unleashed without reservation. In an instant, the addition of the 2 supreme powers allowed Lu Feng to successfully enter the 3rd-level demigod realm. The current Lu Feng was already a powerhouse on the same level as the projection. If this continued, although Lu Feng could not break the demigod domain's shackles, he would start to approach the 4th-layer demigod domain. Of course, his combat strength would also soar by a lot, causing people to tremble in fear. However, Lu Feng did not intend to do that. Because that way, the battle would be over in an instant. I just comprehended the power of death, and wanted to find a suitable sparring partner. Who would have thought that I would run into one so casually? Lu Feng's lips curled into a slightly happy smile. Lu Feng had never used the power of death before. Previously, Lu Feng had hoped to find an opportunity to try it out. Unfortunately, this opportunity had never presented itself. Now that he had finally encountered it, Lu Feng was really happy. This time, the first to move wasn't Lu Feng, but the projection in front of him. In an instant, the projection had already appeared beside Lu Feng. The existence of the illusory figure was extremely hazy and blurry. However, one thing was certain. The illusory figure was a completely humanoid existence. Its movements were no different from a human's. Therefore, the moment it came to Lu Feng's side, the shadow threw out an extremely powerful punch. Vaguely, the space trembled slightly as a terrifying power descended. Lu Feng didn't dodge because it was too easy for him to dodge. But Lu Feng didn't want to do that, because if he did, it would be meaningless. He wanted to familiarize himself with the power of death, so he would have to go through countless collisions to achieve that. Therefore, Lu Feng also threw out a punch. This punch was supported by Lu Feng's bloodline power and the power of death. The terrifying power was far from what the projection could compare to. In the instant of the collision, the shadow was sent flying far away. Lu Feng's human monarch bloodline power and the power of death were both true pinnacle supreme powers. Power was terrifying and belonged to the most terrifying and extreme existence among supreme powers. As for the power of this illusory figure, it was only equivalent to an existence that had comprehended two of the most ordinary supreme powers. Although Lu Feng was also only supported by two supreme powers, there was still an essential difference between him and the projection. Therefore, Lu Feng's attack easily sent the projection far away. However, although this black projection wasn't as powerful as those monstrous geniuses of the new era, its endurance was much higher. After being hit by Lu Feng's powerful attack that was filled with the true essence of death, it actually didn't seem to suffer any damage. It still looked the same as before and actually charged at Lu Feng again. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.